Cinphomaniac is full of spoilers. If the movie's there in the title, we're probably gonna say everything that happens in it. So don't fucking listen if you don't want to know.
Everyone's talking about Licorice Pizza these days, right? That's because it's the greatest thing to happen in movies since the invention of sound. Everyone wants those advance tickets. Yes, it's the new hit film from Paul Thomas Anderson with Alana, HAIM and Cooper Hoffman.
Yellow.
Sean Penn, Tom Waits,
Coming in hot.
Bradley Cooper, Benny Safdie, and some special guests.
I'm John Peters. My only problem in life is that I love tail too much. Is that your sister?
Advance tickets to select theaters in Los Angeles and New York are on sale now. So you're going to want to go to licoricepizzamovie.com and you're going to want to figure out some tickets. Licorice Pizza in select theaters November 26th, everywhere Christmas Day, rated R.
To me, the great hope is just people who normally wouldn't make movies are going to be making them. And, suddenly one day some little fat girl in Ohio is going to be the new Mozart, and make a beautiful film with her little father's camera. To me, the great hope is girl in Ohio is going to be the new Mozart. To me, the great hope is people who normally wouldn't make movies are going to be making them. To me, the great hope is Ohio is going to be the new Mozart. To me, the great hope is people who normally wouldn't make movies are going to be making them. To me, the great hope is one day some little fat girl in Ohio is going to just be Mozart. Normally wouldn't make movies in Ohio is making the new Mozart. Just people who normally wouldn't make Mozart be making them. To me, the great hope girl in Ohio is going to make a Mozart beautiful film with her little father's camera recorder, and for once the so-called professionalism about moving Mozart destroyed forever, and it'll really become an art form. That's my opinion.
I've been telling you for a while, I need you to go see Licorice Pizza. And you finally saw it.
Finally saw Licorice Pizza. Wow.
Well, yeah, wow. It's a good moment because, technically we didn't start us recording together with this, but the first episode we ever released, outside of just a brief little intro thing, was on Phantom Thread, the previous Paul Thomas Anderson movie. So we kind of started with PTA, and now we're back to PTA, which is nice. I mean, if I had done this a week earlier, it would have been good because I've been calling the new straight of episodes our season 2. So this would have been a good season 2 opener in the sense that it was echo the season 1 opener. But nevertheless, it's good same difference. And I'm always happy to go back to PTA because I've said this probably, I don't know how many times on the show, but that's that he's David Lynch, I guess I've said is my favorite director, and that's true, but it's a very tight competition with him and PTA mainly, and then maybe you throw in a Malick or a Scorsese, but PTA did make what's absolutely indisputably my favorite movie of all time, which is a movie we haven't fully covered on this pod yet. Eventually we'll do it, but as you might imagine, my bar to cover that movie is going to be almost too high for me to bear. But yeah, the movie I'm talking about is The Master, the film he made in 2012.
Your favorite,
yeah. Joaquin Phoenix, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Amy Adams.
How interesting he brings it full circle with Philip Seymour Hoffman's son.
Yeah, Cooper. I have a lot of things to say. Well, it's not that I have so much to say, but I have a lot of interesting things I want to get your thoughts on when it comes to Cooper and Alana as well. And I think that's better saved for after we get a little bit more context of the rest of the movie. But I'll just say that happy to come back to PTA as always. Now, I did record some initial impressions on this film, not long after I first saw it, which is an experience that I'm also going to talk about. But yeah, no. So I'm always happy to get back to the Paul Thomas Anderson sort of conversation because being that he is one of my favorite director of my favorite movie, I find everything he does interesting. All of his movies, every single one he's ever made, I love. I don't mean I don't mean think are great. I mean I love them. I chew them up. I drink them. I drink the milkshake. All the above on that.
We drink the milkshake. That's right.
Yeah. So Dana, now that you finally have wait 1 second. The other thing I was saying, I realized now when I was getting is I actually did record some impressions of this movie that is on a pod that I don't think will ever release just because it's just so out of context now. But yeah, I said some interesting stuff, but I think that was only after seeing it one time. My sort of take on it is much more refined after I've actually only seen it twice. I saw it a second time in theaters with my brother, or sorry, not my brother, my dad and sister, not long after Christmas. I think actually, no, it was on Christmas Day. And that's when it opened in where I was at in upstate New York. I have the screener here. I have not watched it. I've thought about watching it last night, but I got very distracted editing some of our previous shows. That just went up. And then also, and this is the only thing I'll say about it, Dana, because I'm assuming that even if you've been keeping up with the show, you probably haven't seen this latest episode because the only time you would have had to watch it is after midnight last night or early this morning. But the Book of Boba Fett, have you been keeping up with that at all?
I have been. Yes.
Okay. So
I don't usually watch it Wednesdays. I usually watch it Saturday or Sunday because work and stuff.
Yeah. So I'm assuming you haven't seen what came on the airwave barely last night.
No.
Okay. I don't want to spoil it for you
don't
at
spoil
all.
It.
No. I don't want to spoil it for you all. I it's really almost like a thing where I can almost say nothing about it without kind of spoiling it. But
okay.
You got it. I know that anyone who's hearing this, who's already watched this, which given that this is probably not going to, be in anyone's ears for another 3 or 4 days at least, that they'll know what I'm talking about. But dude, I've said this to other people. I really want to reiterate, what they are doing makes all the bullshit that we had to endure with the sequel trilogy and some of those other movies. Why did they even waste our time? Why? You could have been doing this. I don't know.
They could have been doing this.
You could. I mean, it's interesting to think what this stuff would be like as movies. Maybe it can't work as
they
movies.
didn't have Favreau and Rodriguez.
And actually, this latest episode is actually directed by Bryce Dallas Howard, who directed episode in the first and second season of The Mandalorian, both of which were good. But here you'd think and I mean this in the best way, not in the bad way. You'd think this was directed by George Lucas if you watch this. You'd be like, this
You're kidding.
Feels bigger than, and when I say bigger, I don't mean in terms of set piece or anything like that. But there are moments that feel okay, this is something that George did literally. And this is calling back to that in such a strong way. And it's wow, look how much better it looks than when he did it, which is a technology thing. But I think it's also an endearment thing, because with these particular characters and these things, it has meaning and it feels like it's connected to those earlier things that George did in such a deep way. And then it just also sets the tone for the future. Damn, dude, the stuff that we're probably going to be getting in Ahsoka, Mandalorian season 3, whatever they've alluded. This is what I was getting at when it comes to movies. They've alluded to some kind of crossover event thing, which yes, it makes sense that would be the form of a Disney Plus thing. But dude, when there's no Star Wars movies on the upcoming slate anymore, they've had to basically cancel them all. They're all garbage. They're garbage brains from garbage minds from garbage shit. I just can't deal with it. Why not just say, hey, let's make this, let's make an actual let's put this on the big screen. Because at this point, with what they're doing with Marvel, it's clearly they're we have the expectation that Disney Plus, theatrical, we should treat them as kind of in some ways the same, or on even footing. They're not quite there with Star Wars, even though ironically, unlike Marvel, where there is movies and movies that are successful, Star Wars, the only thing that exists and is successful that anyone gives a fuck about is the stuff on Disney Plus. There hasn't been a movie in now 2+ years, and there's not going to be another one in at least another 2 years. So it's
it's the reason I got Disney Plus. Obviously, it's the reason all of us got Disney Plus.
Yeah, Mandalorian is what launched the whole platform. So
obviously, because I already owned everything else. I've already paid for all of those things 3 times. I paid for them to watch them in theaters. Then I paid for VHS. Then I paid for DVDs. Then I paid for Blu-rays. Do you know how many copies of Beauty and the Beast I have paid for in my life.
I mean, I don't know exactly, but I can imagine.
It's 1 million, Marcus.
Yeah.
Because I paid for it in every iteration, and I did it again to now have it digitally.
Does that include the sort of spin-off sequel stuff too? Like
well, if you're counting those, it's more. If you're counting, I'm talking about the original animated.
Can I just say that's low key, even though it's not like I've sat down and watched a single one. There's so much stuff on Disney Plus that like I remember when I first got the service, like, oh, this is on here, this is on here. I haven't watched any of it, and I don't think I ever will. But the point is, I just like knowing it's there.
I've actually thrown a lot of it on.
Yeah. I love that they have all the weird, what were once just direct to VHS like spin-off
during Christmas
movies.
There was a lot of
I love that they have all those
stuff.
They have like Lion King 2, Lion King 1.5. They have like the 2 and 3 lads.
They also have all the Disney Channel original movies.
I haven't watched it since I was like 6 years old, but I can tell you that like my favorite movie, or like one of the movies I most had on rewind repeat, was the Aladdin 2 Return of Jafar movie. I thought that movie was way better than the first one. I was like, dude, this is where the crack is. Like give me that. And then the third one, Arabian Nights, I was like, that movie felt like a myth because I didn't own the VHS. I had a friend who did, and I watched it once or twice there, and I was like, this feels like fan fiction. Even before I understood that, that's how I felt about it.
Like the makers.
I was like, this is the fanfic bullshit. This is like they've ran out of it. They're like trying to pretend it's something that's not. It's not the trilogy capstone. It's just some bullshit. Anyway,
imagine 10-year-old you going on this rant. It's great.
Oh yeah. Oh, I mean, younger than 10. Like we're talking like 7-year-old me, which is even funny. Yeah. Okay. So look, I'll leave the Mandalorian and Star Wars talk behind now, since you're just going to be tempting me to spoil exactly what I'm talking about. But suffice to say, I think we have a very bright future. Obi-Wan Kenobi show. It's like
very exciting.
That's to me where it's like going to be almost like that'll be the real interesting one in the terms of like, it's the one that's obviously most directly plugged into the movies, and it's literally Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi. But like, I kind of, even though it's set in a different era, it's set, during the Empire era, I kind of feel like they're not going to not let it set things up or tie things into the other stuff they're doing on these other shows, the Mandoverse shows, as you would say. And so that's going to be very interesting to see what that entails. If I'm right, I have to think I'm right. I feel like there's almost no shot I'm not right about that. Now, getting back to Licorice Pizza and Paul Thomas Anderson, what did you, now that you finally saw the movie, where's your head at, Dana? Like, what'd you think of this? I've been dying to know. You haven't said anything since you watched it.
I haven't. Overall, I liked it, but I do have a lot of mixed feelings. This is probably the most mixed feelings I've ever had about a PTA movie. And I think it's because of the age difference. I think it's because like technically it's statutory. I had so many annoying moments with Alana where I'm just like, I'm so annoyed by you. I can't believe how selfish you are and how much you want attention. That like, this is what, at the same time, I have known a few child actors in my day, and the level of confidence that comes with having your parents work for you is unmatched. I have to say. And he, I can't remember his first name, Philip Seymour Hoffman's son, Cooper really nailed that. Cooper really nailed that. Like, yeah, I shouldn't be this confident, but my parents work for me, so it's kind of warranted. I had a lot of those moments where I was just like, okay, I see this character in Alana, and I see every high school teacher that has slept with a student before, in the sense that she just wants attention from somebody, anybody. She's so desperate for attention that this 15-year-old gets her to get up out of her chair while she's taking pictures, and not only stand there while he's taking his photos, but walk him all the way out the gym to the door. Yeah. She doesn't do that to any other student. That's day one. And all he had to do was say, hey, you say everything twice. Do you want to go out with me? because
Well,
she's so
Dana.
desperate for attention. And I'm so like, I get it. She's beat up by her family, sort of, not really beat up. I think she kind of imagines a lot of it, makes it worse than it is. She makes herself the victim, which again is that mentality of like, well, I'm a victim in my life. And this one person, even if they're 15, says I'm pretty, sees me, wants to take me out to dinner. So I'll go. I'm annoyed by her. I just can't. She's just so selfish and I just can't. Something that I also noticed in that first scene is she doesn't flinch when her boss slaps her in the ass, right? She's chasing attention from a 15-year-old, but ignoring the boss that slaps her ass because it's not the attention she wants. It's a different kind of attention. And she wants someone to pay attention to her and not to her body. Right. And who's the first person paying attention to her is this 15-year-old kid who's kind of tall for his age, who's kind of goofy, but very confident. Confidence is key. Also, I find it interesting that later on we find out that Alana has lied about her age, even to him. She says she's 25 the whole time. And toward the end of the film, she lets it slip in the car that she's actually 28. And then she goes, 25. So she's actually 28.
Wait, I don't remember that at all.
Yeah, it's toward the end. And I was like, oh, you let your real age slip toward the end when you've been drinking a little bit. You've even been lying to the 15-year-old kid about how old you are. Like, you're already 10
Wait,
years
hold on.
older.
I gotta think about what you're saying for a second, because I'm not doubting what you're saying at all. But I'm just thinking about it because I didn't catch that. I don't remember exactly the part you're talking about, but
it's toward the end of the movie. They're in a car, and I think there's somebody else in the car. I can't remember which. If it's
John Peters,
somebody else,
the Bradley Cooper character.
Yeah, it might have been. Mm-hmm. And she says
she might have been lying to him to sound older, but I also no. But like here's.
But
the,
she
here's
corrects
the,
herself. She corrects herself. She says 28, and then she's like 25. So
right. I think
why, no. I think she let her real age slip.
Okay, that's it. I wonder if Paul is it, because that's a thing I was thinking about talking about a little bit, but Paul's been more vocal about this movie than he's ever been with a movie really since like Boogie Nights. And what I mean is like he's just actually like doing interviews and Q&As where he's
the
like,
press,
pretty relatively open. And so I don't know if that question's been asked to him or he's made comment on it, because that's like the type of thing that if it gets brought up, you can get a firm answer on.
Yeah.
Because even if I watch this scene again, like I'm not sure I could give you a definitive answer. I feel like you could read it multiple ways. Like you could read it like she said a higher age and then realized like, no, I'll be honest and give a younger age. Or you could read it the way you're saying. Or
she let her real.
Here's a third option. The third option would be to say she, like as the actor, slipped up and then left it. And here's why
continuity would have caught it.
No. But here's
scripty would have caught it.
There's two things to keep in mind about that, right? Yeah, and you're saying continuity could be caught. We're gonna talk a little bit about this, but the way Paul Thomas Anderson tends to work is like he does not. We talked a lot about this on Phantom Thread, but this movie provides us another opportunity to flesh this out. It seems to me that he does not like to make those types of distinctions. He likes mistakes. He likes things that sort of arise organically. He likes to keep as much of that in as possible. He likes you to feel the tension of the performers not being sure if the camera's still rolling. Like he almost deliberately tries to push towards that.
I think in this particular instance, it definitely just gives me the feeling more so than ever that Alana is a liar.
Well, no, I want to take what you're saying seriously. I just want to lay out the other possibilities for a second. So I think that, and there's a specific anecdote that and I'm not sure if we're talking about the same scene, but there's a specific anecdote related to the set piece where she's driving the truck and involving John Peters and all the gas stuff. That's towards the back end of the movie. There's a specific anecdote that Alana has told about that set piece that really illustrates what I'm talking about in terms of like the Paul Thomas Anderson method and like how he almost leans way like towards like editing with him must be very interesting. And he actually had a new editor on this movie. I think it was very interesting because he's almost like, I'd rather show the stuff like that's like technically past the cut or before I call action than the stuff during. Like he really seems to lean towards this sort of like the performers are just totally like unaware of like what's really going on type of thing, and like letting the naturalism of that take fold. That's not the only thing he does, but it's one of the things he seems to like to do. And so because of that, it's very easy for me to believe that a continuity error like that would just be kept in. Now, I'll say this too. Another reason I think it's perhaps a continuity error is because Alana herself, I think, would have been 28 or 29 when they were filming this movie. Like, so that's why I'm like,
pretty
she might
sure.
have just said her
I'm
actual
like 99%
age.
sure it's when she's in the car with Bradley Cooper.
Yeah. So so again, to me,
it's gotta be. So maybe she is lying about being older, but either way,
I think it's
or maybe
any one of those three
continuity
is possible.
I thought it made me dislike her character even more.
Okay, so like I want to let you go on with that. Like, why do you dislike her character so much? I mean, you've already given some reasons.
I can't get behind this like ladder climbing mentality of, oh, I'm gonna go with. She immediately claims Gary when he's on stage. I'm his chaperone, and they're like, "Shut up, no one cares." And she's like, "I'm his chaperone." She can't wait to like cling to this one kid that's on stage out of many kids. He's not even the star of this show. He doesn't even have a line by himself that they showed, but yet she wants to cling to this stardom, right? She can't wait to tell the people next to her who she doesn't know that she's the chaperone. And then one of the better looking kids asks her out, and she can't wait to go with that kid. And then when Sean Penn's character, who is a movie star, like a legit movie star, gives her any attention, there she goes with him, even though he literally doesn't even know her name. Doesn't know her name. Has no idea who she is. She's just there because
her name's Rainbow to him.
To him, her name is, or was it? Because does she do that movie? Does she get that part? Does it ever happen? Likely no.
It's kind of implied that she does not
get it. Yeah, right. Yeah. So it's really just messing around with her, using her for his gain, his own needs. And her being okay with that because she means that she's the Grace Kelly for the moment. She gets the attention for the moment. Right. What else? Something that I think I really did like about her character, but this may be a P.T. Anderson choice, is that they chose to not hide her bruises. She has a bunch of unexplained bruises throughout the film. And I think that they're just normal life bruises. Like they're ones that I would get myself from walking into the coffee table type thing. And they just let it be. They let it be. And I really enjoyed that. They didn't try to cover anything up specifically when she's, again, can't wait to get attention in this bikini while everyone else is fully clothed at this opening. She chooses to stay in that outfit. She chooses to stay in that outfit. She could have put on a robe when the show was over or when whatever. Instead, she runs around kissing people in a bikini because she wants attention. So then you notice that she's got a big old bruise on her right butt cheek, big old purple bruise. And you see it a bunch of times. And I'm just like, that's dope. That's real life. They're not trying to make her something that she's not. They're not trying to make her this perfect because Alana's character would not put makeup on a bruise. She wouldn't think to put makeup on a bruise because why would you do that in that time? Why would that be a thing? I don't even think body makeup was a thing in that time.
That's what I mean. They, I can almost be 100% certain that you're correct that that's an intentional choice. They were very deliberate to like not try to use makeup to cover like, you know, the texture of people's skin or faces in the way you normally would. Right. There's a very deliberate choice. Sometimes it's like it almost takes a little bit getting used to because you're just not used to seeing that so much in a movie. Even like very realistic movies, like even and sometimes it's just like even documentaries, because even though they're not applying makeup necessarily, they're just like kind of like the way PTA tends to light. It's like it's almost like you're not putting the makeup on, but you're also lighting things in such a way where you're really going to see everything.
You're going to see everything. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, he left the bruises there on purpose because real Alana would probably have some, because she probably did. I think there is one line that sums up why I don't like her character, or why I wish she was the Alana that drove all the way back up the street backwards. I wish she was more that Alana the whole film.
But that's character growth. She becomes that person. I know. It starts there.
Well, but she ends up still being this person thinking, I don't understand, but I'm sexy, right? That sums her up.
I've had enough of your hate and ass hating.
I just can't.
I've had enough of your hate and ass hating. All right, I'm about to jack this whole thing back.
She said it, not me.
Okay,
she said, I don't understand, but I'm sexy, right? And that's her whole character.
That line's great. Okay.
It's fantastic because it's what she's thinking all the time, always. And I don't like that.
Here's the funny thing. I've only met one other person who didn't like this movie, and it was my sister. And I'm glad I don't have her on here.
You and your sister.
because the pile on would be way too much. Because I don't even think her disagreements aren't necessarily the same as yours, but she would pile on and add on all the shit to you saying, and it would just be like an absolute shit. I would hate it.
Just a shitstorm.
I would hate it. It's just
sure.
Now, I don't think this is a coincidence, but I also don't obviously think this is the entire reason. Obviously, you both are women, which isn't to say I haven't met women that I don't know really too many personally. I
don't know if this movie is for women.
No. See, I'm not gonna let you say that though. Hold on. I know there are plenty of
character
female people
with women. There you go. Women don't identify with Alana.
Let me say this. I know, and you can dig it up for yourself. You can research it for yourself. There are plenty of women voices who have given this movie a positive spin. It's not like some one-sided thing.
Do they like attention from 15-year-olds?
Gonna plead the fifth. What I'm saying is, Dana, all that being said, I was gonna say this anyway because I think it's gonna be relevant in a few areas. Well, more than a few areas. In fact, it's going to be the theme of the whole thing. Because, I have a lot. I not only have a lot to say about this movie, I have a very specific take on this movie.
I assume that you had notes. And by the way, be proud of me because I needed to see this. Obviously, it was in theaters. And a lot of times when I watch movies for our podcast, I specifically watch them at home so I can take notes on my phone. But I didn't want to be rude and take notes on my phone in a movie theater. So I was the weirdo in the front of the theater with my little notebook and pen. And some kids kept looking over to me because something would happen. And I'd go and open my notebook and start jotting stuff down.
Yo, but that makes you kind of like an old school movie reviewer. That's actually kind of dope.
Yeah, my little notebook and my little pen.
Yeah, dude, that's like what old movie reviewers used to do.
Everything else I've gotten to either be in a corner where I'm not bothering anyone, taking notes, or watch it at home. So that was kind of fun.
Movie reviewers used to learn how to read and write in the dark, and then would watch the movies in the project on the screen and scribble shit down. So there you go. You're like,
I was closer to the screen too, so I could see what I was writing in the dark.
Yeah, well, that's a good trick too. A lot of movie reviewers like to sit in the front. Whether that negatively impacts the reviews or not, to be determined.
Actually like going and sitting kind of toward the front, especially if I go by myself. I like to sit toward the front.
True. So Dana, here's the thing. I think it's important for me to preface this in saying that I'm a dude, I'm a man. maybe not always the most manly man, but I am a man. And gender and sex and the whole nature of those dynamics, both literally, metaphorically, contextually, historically, in cinema, out of cinema, is very relevant to, I think, explaining this movie or going along with the take that I'm going to give on this movie, etc. I think on a more basic level, though, I can kind of understand, when I say that, my sister, and I don't necessarily think of you two as...
It's so funny. I can't believe she didn't really like it. I really would have thought she did.
I don't want to... So I'm trying to avoid the topic of, what I really think was going on with my sister at the time. But, that's a separate issue. But I do think, nevertheless, that there's a certain degree, because you both kind of honed in on it again, I think coming from slightly different places, but nevertheless having a similar conclusion, that part of why this movie irks you is because you just are kind of fixating on a lot of things you seem to not like or negatively identify with
I did
Alana.
see a lot of things I did like too, but not necessarily through Alana's character. There were a lot of things that I did like through the rest of the film.
Okay, well, Miss Negative.
Mostly Alana's character annoyed me. However,
okay,
Tom Waits can do no wrong, does do no wrong, is fantastic in everything. And my favorite shot of this movie, this entire film, is him appearing in a cloud of smoke with the light coming behind him.
Yeah.
Amazing. You just see like the hair and the smoke and him kind of appear, and it's not effects, like they did that on set.
No,
it looked incredible.
Yeah.
And Tom Waits just freaking shows up like this badass. Some other things that I really did like, Gary was a Valentine. I don't know why. I kind of like the cheesiness of his, I don't know, because it sounds like a stage name, but I don't think it was a stage name. And I kind of liked that.
Well, that's an interesting question. We're going to talk a little bit more about this, but Gary's based off a real person with a different last name. And one could argue that this is like a stage name from that reason, or not. Like there's nothing definitive that I picked up on in the movie to suggest one way or the other, but obviously actors, child actors, stage names, whatever, it's not unusual.
Also, I really liked Sean Penn. His where he's like, don't ask me about war, and then he starts talking about war.
We're going to talk about the quote Jack Holden scene.
Jack Holden
for sure. Yeah, I want to get into that, but look, I just want to say, like, my first impression of the film, obviously, I don't know if it's obvious. It should be obvious. We've just had a lot of hating for God knows how long. Dana is unbearable. I fucking love this movie. I fucking love this movie. Okay, and do I think it's a perfect movie or PTA's best movie? No, but like I also think
we agree
that,
it's not his best one. There we go.
Well, I mean, but that's like saying that like Michael Jordan's like Game 5 was not in 1994 is like not his best game. He fucking like won the championship. Like it's like silly. And I probably got all those details.
No one's saying this is not a terrible movie, but Alana almost ruins it for me.
Okay, that's like an oxymoron of a.
It's not terrible. I still kind of enjoy the story, and I like a lot of the characters, and I do like visually, of course, everything that he does. It's one of my favorite things about him, but I'm just so annoyed, and maybe that.
Let me just say this: when this goes up, y'all should have heard our last discussion that we recorded last week about the Matrix Resurrection, and what I said to Data. This is like now 2 weeks in a row. It's very unusual that you're actually this sort of dissenting voice. But let me just put that out there. At this time, I really do mean this. You can take the blue pill, and you can stay where you're at, and the podcast will end right here. Or you can take the red pill, and I can show you why this movie is dope as hell. Okay, and you just gotta get there with me. All right, I'm telling you. I think I don't know, actually. I mean, to be perfectly fair and honest, I don't know if I'm going to convince you, but I think I can convince you. I think I can convince you that, like, I feel like a lot of what you're rubbing up against is like a strength, not a weakness. Like maybe for you personally, it was still nevertheless an annoying experience, but like
because this film did conjure a visceral reaction in me. That is fair. I had a feeling. The feeling was annoyance, but yes, I did sit in a theater and have a feeling that made me want to go and get my pen out, because it made me feel something. I wasn't just sitting there bored. I was intrigued. There was no way I was going to get up and go to the bathroom because I needed to see what was coming next. In that sense, I had a really good time, but at the same time, I'm like, I'm just annoyed by this character. That doesn't mean that I didn't have a good time. I'm just like, if I was friends with her, I'd be like, bitch, you need to get your life together. look at yourself, look at your choices. If she's my sister, that's what I would say. You're really, and the sister that she's like, is it weird that I hang out
she has two sisters.
I know, and one of them smokes weed and lies to her. Specifically, like, takes a long ass time. Is it weird that I hang out with Gary with his 15-year-old friends, and she takes the longest drag of a joint and is like, no. That's the middle sister being the placater of the family. No, everything's cool. Don't be upset.
She just doesn't give a fuck.
She doesn't give any shits. Why would she?
Okay.
Yeah.
So, look, when I saw this film, it was a very special experience. I got to see it before it even had its LA opening. Like, I saw it the first week of November.
Oh, I think that's right. You told me that.
Yeah, I told you. I took some pictures of the event. It was cool. It was insanely cool. And this was something where I had a good feeling that, because he's in the PGA, my roommate Yannick would get some sort of invite to something like this. And I was like, dude, I have to go if you get this invite. Like, I have to go. And so he's like, okay. So that, of course, happened, and we went, and we're talking a 70 millimeter screening at the Regency Theater. At that point, I didn't know. I don't know if anyone knew it. I don't know if it had been formally announced, but basically it came down from the wire after that when they did open the movie over Thanksgiving week in LA, they were going to essentially, from then to they expanded it out, play it exclusively at that one theater on that one screen in 70 millimeter. So this is very important, because I think one of the things I want to put into context for everybody who maybe doesn't live in LA or wasn't aware that this was going on, Licorice Pizza was a big deal from like Thanksgiving to Christmas in LA. Like, people, it had hype. It had like some real mustard to it. These shows were selling out. People would get in line hours early to get a seat. It was a big, people who would never go to the Westwood, UCLA area were going there. Became a destination. It became a destination and a thing to do. And I think this was all the exact intention, and it worked. And that just shows you that there's some real fucking genius on the producing and distribution team of this film. And
to create scarcity, to create the hype, you have to.
Yeah,
sure. I think you can only see it here. It's super exclusive. Everyone's like, well, then I have to go.
Right. I think scarcity and all that, exactly what you said, is obviously a big part of the equation. But like, maybe this is just another way of saying this, but like, I think what really made it work is that they found this way to eventize the movie, and not only eventize it in the broader sense that sometimes that word gets tossed around, but really in the very specific sense of, look, a lot of the movie going, this relates to the conversation we were having last week about the award season being dead on arrival, right? Is that a lot of just the general LA movie going culture. And LA movie going culture is, you could say, it's related to all other movie cultures. In fact, it's where all other movie going cultures, except maybe New York, is its own sort of parallel.
Well, we're the only place that every other billboard is for a movie or a TV show. I think that tends to surprise a lot of people that come to visit LA. They're like, why are all the billboards for TV shows? I think when I first
I mean, we know the answer. It's all internal campaigning, but like, I think here's the main point though. It's that LA's movie going culture is what sets the tone for all the movie going cultures. And it's the most like intense for all the obvious reasons. But like a movie going culture, a culture revolves around a set of shared ritual, a shared set of activity, a shared sense of community. Under the pandemic, that had gone away. And it had gone away not just in the fact that movie theaters were closed. It had gone away in the sense that even after movie theaters started to reopen, certain majorly important institutions, and we talked about this in the pod when it happened last year, I'm specifically talking about ArcLight, that not coming back had a huge ramification for the movie culture out here. And why I keep emphasizing this movie culture thing is this has a lot to do with the health and viability of the box office and the success of a certain tier of movies that basically have now been rendered non-existent outside of streaming platforms for the last 2 years. And actually all movies have been almost rendered non-existent with the exception of Spider-Man and I guess now Scream. And it's like, it's getting more and more dire where like only 1 or 2 movies can really even get anything going for them in a movie theater setting right now. Licorice Pizza, as you notice, you just saw it in a theater, is still playing in theaters. PTA said back in November.
And is playing in Burbank.
Oh, Burbank's, that's home turf, baby.
Home turf.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the Valley, and I want to get your Valley thoughts in a moment. But like, it's very important because PTA said in November and all this press, he's like, I want this movie to play in theaters for a fucking year. That is in a world where movies don't last in movie theaters a week. This is him saying this. How is that possible? Well, the possibility lies in its actual attempt to meaningfully address the actual fucking issue, which implies he understands the issue. So here's the issue. That's what I was getting to. This movie-going culture in LA thing that I'm talking about. When you have an institution like the ArcLight, a distribution house like A24 or Neon or any of these like sort of like independent, but like successful and kind of like trendy independent sort of distributors, which have become more and more prominent in the last like 5-6 years. And they're kind of like picking up the slack of like what was formerly the sort of sub-studio, sub-corporate brands, like, Fox Searchlight, which is still around and doing good stuff. Sony Pictures Classic, less around. The now totally defunct Paramount, Vantage and Warner Independent, dead. It's picking up the slack for those institutions that were prominent in the 2000s, late 90s. Miramax, obviously, that's gone. So with that in mind, you need a movie theater where you could say, hey, we're going to open this movie in just New York and LA. Well, in order to do that, you have to have a place where people go fucking see it. And one of the things that you notice, especially at this time of the year, is that there's kind of this snowballing effect / like just institutional visiting effect, meaning like, and I know because I used to work at ArcLight, like people will come in, they don't necessarily know all the movies. They see one and then they're like, what's this other movie that's playing here? I guess we'll come back tomorrow and see that. And you just don't have that anymore. So there, and you get the vibe that it's like, it's not even about the movie. It's like, I want to see these movies. I want to see all these movies. There's like a completion checklist sensibility, but there's also like, this is something to do. And I like being here. I don't care if I was just here last night. I'm going to come back tomorrow night, or certainly going to come back later this week. And we're going to have another date night and we'll knock out the next movie in this thing. And it creates a snowballing effect where you're constantly around other people doing the same thing. You're feeling that sense of community and culture. Like, oh, I go to the movie, then I talk about the movie, we get a drink, we get something to eat. It's a whole thing. And you might say, what's distinct about this from just like the usual movie-going activity in the theatrical world? Well, in a very basic sense, nothing, but in a very specific and trend-setting sense, everything. Because that can't happen for movies that aren't these by default big, giant marketing machine things like a Spider-Man, if you don't have people actually giving what they call word of mouth. Okay. So you need word of mouth. You can't get word of mouth and what translates to it online with tweets and this. It's like, it can only get you so far. It might get you to fire something up on the Netflix, but to get you to actually go out to a fucking theater, that's not what's going to work. You need to know other people in your actual social life, in your world, in your own social life are participating in this. If you don't feel like that participation is real, you don't tend to care about it. So what Licorice Pizza did by concentrating all the attention on one theater and it being a PTA film, it being set in LA in the Valley, be involving Alana, all these different things work in its favor to further concentrate that sense. But it's ultimately that strategy of just like funneling all the people into this. Because once people start hearing, oh, everyone in LA is going out of their way to this one theater to see this one movie, well, I better see it too. It becomes like that. And then it's like, even if I didn't make it to that first theater, now you hear, oh, it wasn't playing at these other theaters before, but now it is. I guess I should still go see it. And it also has the effect of like, this is what I mean about the long-term game. It's like, if you are very controlled, because a lot of what movies do is they spend all this money on marketing. they blitz it, they open wide, and then they watch as people don't come in. And it's like all the money's already spent. The only thing they can do is pull the rug out and like, stop the bleeding. This is the opposite approach. This is like, let's plant a crumb. Let's plant a crumb. Let's plant a crumb. Let's plant a crumb. If things aren't moving fast enough, we'll leave it exactly where it's at. And we'll just ride it out. We'll ride it out. We'll ride it out. It's kind of like that little, like, it's kind of actually like the betting strategy that PTA has Philip Baker Hall's character, Sidney, in his debut future, Hard 8, explaining to John C. Reilly at the beginning of the movie. It's just like, you're just going to keep rotating it on the player's card. You make a small bet, you keep it going, you get your rate card up, then you go back, you cycle the money again. And what's happening is you're actually not really spending or losing any money. You're just cycling the money through the rate card. So the rate card thinks you're losing a bunch of money when you're actually not. And that way the hotel is like, oh my God, this guy's throwing tons of money around here. We better comp him some shit. It's exactly like that. It's kind of funny making that distinction. But yeah, so that viability, I said the award season's dead on arrival, but Licorice Pizza, not just because of the quality of the film and the good buzz around it, is like going to be viable in that space, specifically because it's one of the few movies to kind of stay in sight, to stay in eye. There's still marketing up for it everywhere. And that's because like there's a reason to keep it up, because it's still actually playing in fucking theaters, unlike every other movie. like it's kind of embarrassing, actually, the rest of the state of the movie industry in comparison. So I go see it that first night for any of this has happened yet, but I immediately knew it was real. And it was so amazing because then Paul and Alana came out and did a Q&A, and Ben Mankiewicz was the host of the Q&A from TCM. It was really awesome. It was a really great experience that I'm going to like remember for the rest of my life. And honestly, like I'll say that about almost every time I see a Paul Thomas Anderson movie in theaters for the first time. I mean, they're always events for me personally. And usually I go to like a very like specific, all the last ones I've managed to get some sort of early or special screening that made it feel like a huge deal, projected on film, all that stuff.
Well, anytime you get to go to a screening and there's a Q&A with the director, it's super fun. And you get to see,
for sure.
Yeah.
But like, it's one thing when it's a director, it's like, oh, okay. It's another thing when it's literally your favorite director, and it's the first time he's showing the film, like, to non-crew members. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, it's a whole different ballpark when it's like that, I feel like. But yeah, so it was a really fucking special time, and I'm glad about it, which isn't to say that that's like my entire bias here towards liking this movie. I have a very particular case for why I think this movie is genius. I'll just say, preview it a little bit just to say that the first time I saw it, I only had like 75% of this theory. And the last 25% that was missing was actually somewhat like disappointing for me, because I was like, fuck, man, did he like get it 75% of the way? And then the last 25, I was ready to live with that, because the 75% that fit like was like, oh, I'm pretty good. But getting that last 25% after the second time I saw it, like opened up the Pandora's box the exact way I needed it to, where it's like, oh my God, it makes everything richer and better. And like, I totally get it now. And I can't wait to see it a third time just to see if I can deepen that further. Like, I remember I saw The Master in theaters like 7 times, and each time it was like, like a little bit further along.
Yeah, I bet.
Oh my God, dude. I literally
only 7 times, Marcus?
Yeah, that was hard to do actually, because I had a lot of like stuff going on.
That's a longer film too, isn't it? 3 hours?
Yeah, 2 hours and 20 minutes. It's actually, not much longer than this one. The longest PTA movie is Magnolia, and that's like by a good measure, actually. But okay. Now I think the first thing where I want to start getting more deep into the movie, though, is just to say, this is his, we return to PTA, like as I said at the time. This is PTA's return to the Valley and to the 70s version of the Valley, which for him obviously exists as childhood memory. But like, it's very fascinating on that level. And I'm thinking for you living in Burbank, I mean, most of the movie takes place like around Encino, but like, I'm just wondering like how much of the landscape or the landmark or like,
well, the vibes of the Valley are the same. Yeah.
It's unchanging.
I mean, It's honestly probably why I've lived in the Valley for so long, because you are part of LA, but you don't get the LA-ness. You kind of feel like you're kind of in a small town still. And I definitely got that vibe from Licorice Pizza.
Yeah, I love that. I really do love that. But yeah, no, I mean, for me, again, not obviously I've been around the Valley, I've driven around the Valley, I've worked in the Valley, but like, it's not where I live, and it's not what I identify with in LA. That's why it's almost like every time I'm in some area of that, it almost feels like I just literally transported into like a slightly different dimension. Like you can feel it, right? It's crossing it's like
it's different vibes in the
Twilight Zone. It's like that. It's like the Twin Peaks Return. It's like exactly 430 miles. It's like it could all be different on the other side. It's exactly that. You know, it's always fun to get to that mirror universe. That's kind of what I'm saying. And I guess between that, PTA movies, and actually HAIM music videos, also incidentally directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, I do feel like I understand like a certain degree of like Valley iconography that's interesting. I mean, Tail of the Cock or whatever is like just something that I immediately, and I even know exactly what they're talking about with that golf course too. I actually went there to hit balls like
which golf course is it?
Ago. I don't even know what it's called, but it's like, it's just like this.
Is it in the Valley?
Yeah.
There's one right behind me. That's the hike that I go to when I go hiking. There's a golf course at the bottom there in Burbank.
I know which one. I know the one you're talking about there. That's a different one. That's because that's.
Oh, okay. I was wondering if it was that one.
This is like way over kind of. I mean, I guess Encino, but like I'm trying to remember exactly where. It might not technically be that. But in any case, it's like that's an obvious thing, and I believe. God, I feel like such a noob saying this, but I'm pretty sure that's also the same place that's in Magnolia with Donnie, the quiz kid Donnie Smith, and his long lost love, the bartender Brad, and all that. And look, the Valley in this, it's not just PTA going back to the Valley. It's like this movie, and he talked about this in the Q&A. He was like, it's like the bed was like, this is like some Valley Pride project. He's like, it's like, it is. Like, he's like, the mayor wants me to make propaganda videos. I will. He's like, all the things that people say are good about Hollywood, those are lies. They mean the Valley. They don't even know.
They mean the Valley. They do.
Like he's fully embraced this. I guess he always has, going back to Boogie Nights. But
I mean, I'm not arguing. I've lived here for 11 years in California, and I've moved 4 times, and I've never left the Valley.
I want you to meet Paul so you can tell him that. He will love you for that alone. He will feel pride. Ditto, because look, when it comes to Valley ties, I mean, the other Valley tie in and of itself that the entire movie's built around, for Christ's sakes, it are obviously Alana HAIM, but the whole HAIM family and the HAIM sisters. Like, so, I mean, walk me through data if you, because it hasn't come up yet. I haven't asked you, like, are you like a fan of HAIM as a band? Are you like, are you familiar with them super much or not?
I've heard a few of their songs, and they're extremely talented. They're not my everyday vibe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're not my like everyday song vibes, but I do like to throw them on now and then when I'm doing creative stuff. I'm a big fan of harmonies and people that can harmonize, and it's not easy to do. I assume it is easier with your sisters because you should know their voices.
There's a specific line in one of their songs that you just instantly reminded me of, and I almost wanted to sing it, but like it would sound so bad and totally defeat the purpose, where the lyric is literally about how their voices harmonize. I'm like,
yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
So I do enjoy them, but they're not my like everyday jam. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So for me, I mean, saying they're my everyday jam is like a weird claim. I don't know if I have an everyday jam, but I guess if I do, they would also not be it. However, I do consider myself a very legitimate like fan of them. Like, and when I say legitimate, I mean like I listened to their first record around the time it came out and liked it, but like it was like kind of one of those things where I was cycling through a lot of music at the time. It's like 2013 is a very busy time for music, like especially music that I really cared about. So I was just like, oh yeah, that's cool, whatever. I didn't really know anything about it. I didn't consider myself a fan of them yet. What actually made me a fan, and this is why this whole movie felt like such a long time coming, was that they got together with Paul Thomas. I knew they were from the Valley, so it immediately made sense to me. But they got together with Paul Thomas Anderson, and now since this movie's come out, PTA has like told more stories that I didn't know about that like linked them together in ways that I didn't know that I'll get to in a moment. But like they got together to do an early sort of live studio music video look at what became one of the important singles from their second album. And this whole entire thing was later released as a complete kind of like 15-minute performance short film where they played like 3 or 4 of the songs from that record, like early cuts of it too, called Valentine. That didn't come out till after the record itself came out. This was their sophomore album, which, what was that called? Want You Back? Or that was one of the singles on it. And that first music video was Right Now. And I remember I found out because I checked PTA blogs and stuff. But like, it's like, you know, I was like, oh, cool. And I like watched it. I was like, oh yeah, HAIM. I know HAIM. But that's the thing. HAIM hadn't released a new album in like basically 3 years.
A minute. Yeah. So
it was kind of like they were like, in theory, like they were touring and doing stuff, but like you kind of almost would have thought like, oh, are they just like a one record like thing and that's it? No.
Honestly, if you had asked me at that time, I would have thought that they would have done one together, and then I was kind of expecting one of the sisters to branch off and do a solo album after that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
I was kind of waiting for that to happen. So, yeah.
Now I don't think that'll ever happen.
No, now it's too late for that.
Well, no, I don't think it'll ever happen because they're like they've made such a point about being like, we're never going to do that. So I don't know. I guess the solo album, which technically was less of a solo album than I would have thought going in, but like, it's like, no, a lot of HAIM now has their movie solo album. Anyway, so and that's the one you not necessarily think would have had the solo album before. So anyway, that music video for Right Now, I remember just immediately being struck by it, really loving it. It felt like, oh shit, this like brought me back into like the Amy Mann Magnolia collaboration that like obviously meant a lot to me and still does. And so I'm like, that's the thing I always identified about PTA. And this was like what was starting to really prove it. And I think other people who maybe don't identify this about him or don't care about as much about him, and therefore, in my opinion, misunderstand him quite a bit. They don't see it and they think this is like, well, who cares? I remember having a conversation with some grip on some film set saying this shit. And I was like, dude, I'm sorry. You're either a fake fan or you just like don't know what you're talking about. Like, because the reality is like PTA, if you listen to him talk about his influences, is one of his favorite directors. I mean, I would say he said the favorite director is Jonathan Demme. And if you know Jonathan Demme's career and the things he's made a lot of great films, obviously. But even for me, the thing that I'm always like, oh, when Demme's at his best, it's actually when he's directing music videos, like the music video for New Order's Perfect Kiss, which is like my favorite music video of all time, or like the entire Talking Heads, Stop Making Sense performance video movie. That shit is like the shit. Like, you know what I mean? And like the fucking dance scene in Something Wild with the Feelies. It's like that shit is like where like by the way, if you've never seen that movie, we got to cover it at some point. And I got to get your reaction to Jeff Daniels dancing like he thinks he's cool. It's really funny.
Okay.
Yeah, great film. Big influence on PTA, right? So I immediately identify that. So him like being like, oh, okay, I want to direct. Like he had directed music videos before. He directed Fiona Apple's music videos when they were dating. Like he had done stuff with Amy Mann in relation to Magnolia and some of her work. Like he worked with Joanna Newsom on her video. For after making Inherent Vice, right? So, anywho, I'm watching this. I love this music video. It's so raw. It's so real. It's shot on 35 millimeter film. It's like mostly one take, one shot. It's like that shit, it's like his style of filmmaking. It reminded me immediately of that, like I said, the New Order Perfect Kiss video. It was like, oh, okay, that's cool. That's PTA doing a PTA thing. Pretty soon after that, he started they released more of that stuff from Valentine. And then, more recently, like 2 years ago, 3 actually, if you start from the start of the hype cycle of it, when they started releasing stuff for what eventually became the singles and songs for Women in Music Part 3, the most recent HAIM album, easily the best HAIM album. That's when it really started to come to click. Like, oh, these people gel together. Like, they get each other. They're like these Valley kindred spirits. They want to be working together, and they're working to make all these videos like really cool, really fitting, just like awesome stuff. So it felt to me at that point, even though I didn't necessarily see it coming, on some subconscious level, inevitable that they would start being in movies with him. So when the first word came down that PT had a new movie and that Alana HAIM was in it, I was like, well, duh. I did not think she was playing the lead character, though, to be clear.
I also
that was not announced immediately. That was just kind of like eventually became a rumor that no, the movie centers on her and the other character is played by Cooper Hoffman, Philip Seymour Hoffman's son. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, Bradley Cooper's also in it. So you were like, wait, is he the lead? Or like, it was like, it was kind of, and then here's the thing. They actually filmed this in the pandemic and in the heart of the pandemic. They started shooting this like spring, summer 2020.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So they were like the first new thing to try to shoot, basically. In the United States, at least. There were some things shooting in like New Zealand a little bit before that, but like, and I remember it because I was working on my short film stuff, and that's easy to do because you don't really need to follow too many restrictions there when you're doing it like I was. But I remember actually I showed up to a location that I had scouted to shoot, and they were shooting there. And I was like, fuck, I had to go. I wanted to stalk it, but I had to shoot my thing. And I was also like, I don't know, whatever.
Should have stalked.
Yeah. Well, in any case, it was pretty cool. So they made this whole movie during the pandemic. And
it's weird that you and I both almost stalked. So I told you that There Will Be Blood moved in after I did a shoot in West Texas.
Yeah, you did talk.
And then you were doing a shoot. You were scouting for a shoot, and he's there. Weird.
Well, no, I did the scout. Then I came back to location prepared to shoot, and they were already there. It's not like I pulled like some fucking filed some permit with the city to get the location. I was doing it just like, yeah, I can just shoot wherever I want. It's like a small little thing. So look, now it'd be a good time because I think it's important to get more this context as well. If you don't know the actual origins of this film, and it's so funny because you mentioned the whole way that the relationship starts between Alana and Gary, Cooper's character, and like the whole thing of like her just like following him around almost immediately, like all that stuff, everything you said about it, right? Well, that is where this whole movie spun from, just that moment. Because where this came from, according to Paul himself, I'm a little confused. I'm trying to remember the exact detail he gave about when this happened, if it was like when he was actually in high school or when he was dropping off his kid to high school or something along those lines, which, we're talking about a 30-year difference there, or some other event. Either way, I think, you know what it was? I think it was you scouting a high school for the scene in Boogie Nights, the scene where Roller Girl like leaves her test early. That's what I think it was. So it would have been in between. That makes sense contextually. Okay. Let's just go with that, whether I'm right or wrong. Okay. So he's, all
right, I'm with you.
He's scouting the scene. So he's at this high school, and it happens to be photo day. He sees one of the kids, just a kid, go up to the girl who's passing out combs. There's like a pretty girl just passing out combs who's obviously older, works for this photo company. And PJ is like, I could just tell he was fucking trying to ask her out. And that's stuck in his mind as an image, as like a moment of like the balls on this fucking kid.
Yeah.
And he was like, and he had to leave. And he was like, fuck, I wonder if she said yes. That was his whole question. Like, oh man, I wonder what happened. I wonder if she said yes. Like, wouldn't that be wild if she said yes and she actually showed up for a date with this fucking 15-year-old kid? I don't think he was thinking of the moral or ethical implications, Dana, mind you. I think he was just like, that's kind of crazy.
It's kind of crazy. as someone who has been asked out by a 12-year-old when I was 20.
Is that the whole origin story of what your beef is with this movie? You're like,
no.
Like...
no. I just I think when you're in college and you do any like volunteer stuff, there's always going to be one or two kids that like thinks it's funny or like has some balls to come be like, you want to go to a movie later? Can I have your phone number? Like that type of shit. I think that's normal. I think the fact that he asked her out is not that weird. It's the fact that she showed up that's weird.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
15-year-old boys are gonna shoot their shot. You have to be a grown up.
so Dana, I agree with you. But like again, I'm not gonna get into right yet. But everything that I would say is about why this is like, not only does this work, but this is like inherent to the genius or the point of this movie, is embedded in exactly what you said. I don't have to change a word. It's all there. It's just about how you interpret that, right? So anyway, so PTA had that whole little like scene in his mind and like what would hypothetically happen afterwards. Puts that in a drawer, doesn't do anything with it. According to him, thought about it every now and again, but just was like, never really went anywhere. Meanwhile, parallel, you could say, PTA makes contact with this guy, this well-known working movie producer named Gary Gussman. And where is it? Am I saying it right? Either way. Yeah, Gary Gussman, whatever. This is a guy who is like known to kind of be a producer, works a lot with Tom Hanks. He's just like a Hollywood guy. And he became friends with PTA in the course of his movie career. And PTA would talk to him because he'd be like, oh yeah, I grew up in the Valley. And Gary would be like, yeah. You know, I was a child actor back in the day and I was living in, you know, around there. And you just like start telling him stories. And it'd be like one of those things where like, wait, what do you mean you started a waterbed business? And he'd be like, no, for real. Look it up. I'll show you the newspaper clippings.
Yeah.
Or it'd be like, wait, what do you mean you like filled up a waterbed at John Peters' house? He's like, oh yeah, no, I have blah, blah, blah. Like, wait, what do you mean? Like, it should be like a never ending series. You started a pinball like arcade when you were like 15 years old? It's like, yeah,
you had the money.
We had the money. Like
your parents work for you, so you're the boss.
Yeah, exactly. So he had all these stories from the real Gary. And there's nothing about any character like Alana or anything like that in it necessarily.
Well, because the real Alana probably didn't show up.
Right. Well, hold on. So he just had this collection of real Hollywood Valley stories. And like the way this filters into the film is funny because, you know, there's a lot of cases where some people are using the real name. Some people are using slightly changed names. Some people are clearly meant to be a person, but are otherwise unnamed. We'll get into some of that detail later. But it's just interesting because he has this formula of like all these different things. He's working on it. Meanwhile, now you're talking 2017, 2018, you know, into 2019. He's finished Phantom Thread. He's trying to write his next movie. According to him, this is like something where it's like, oh, maybe I'll get back to it. And it's probably what in my head or a lot of PTA fans would probably, I don't know, no idea what this project's about. I don't know if that's what the next project gonna be. Who knows when it'll be coming. But like I can understand because it's embedded into the story of Phantom Thread itself and how he was talking about Phantom Thread, that whole like process. Remember how Reynolds would like he'd do his like show, his latest fashion season collection,
and then need to recluse and recover.
Yeah, exactly. He kind of would go through PTA himself would go through his own version of that, and like he'd come out of it like, oh, I'm ready. I'm writing this stuff, and he would get really intense and like try to write these like 400-page screenplays of insanity. And I think it just was not working for him, according to him. Like he kept getting stuck, and like that always happens. So it's not like,
well, sometimes if you try to force things like that and try to put so much pressure, it's hard to not, you know, shut down.
Right. But one of the things he's good about doing, and I remember him talking about being of this mind even before this happened. So it's a consistent thing if you follow the stuff he says about screenwriting and stuff. Is he was just like, well, I just started toying around with other ideas I had in the drawer just to try to like get the cobwebs off or see if anything stuck. And he went back to the Gary stuff And he was like, okay, this is kind of fun and cool. I don't know what I'd do with it. And then he remembered the story that I told first about the kid in the high school. And he was like, well, what if they're the same story? And it's the kid in the high school, and that's Gary. And the girl does show up for a date. Like, and where does it go from there? And how do I weave her into all these stories I have about Gary? So it's like, boom, boom, boom. Now that starts to work. And I think where this inevitably goes in the process of creating this, and to some extent, is also ultimately a sense of discovery or whatever to get to kind of what I think the ultimate point and vibe of this movie. I think part of it too is that I don't remember exactly when he said he realized it was the girl had to be Alana, but at some point that became the realization. And then it's like, oh, and I think that kind of, again, comes organically out of working with HAIM on music videos, etc., just being in their lives and being like, well, you know, just a lot of ways, Daniel's more the face of the band, or Este's more like kind of like the mature, wise leader in a lot of ways. But if you look at the three, like, especially if you see them in interviews, Daniel rarely talked. Este's very serious. Alana's the one who's like, like kind of like clear, like fighting for personality kind of thing. And that just like kind of works in movies. So to me, it was never surprising that of the three HAIM sisters, that was the one. Because it was like, oh, she's the one with the charisma.
Absolutely.
For this story, but really for any story, she's the one with the kind of like the charisma and the just like that attitude of like, I want it. And you gotta want it. Especially if it's your first time, you gotta want it. You can't be lax about it. And so I think that just created what I call the synthesis that led to the movie you see. Last thing I want to go into before I actually really, because this is all still preface to the real point I want to make about this movie, which is where I hope to actually be able to convince you, Dana, on it. It's just that, you know, we talked about, like I mentioned this earlier, even in the pod, what I like kind of like when we talked about Phantom Thread, like I really find it fascinating trying to reverse engineer, although also forward engineer or incorporate things PTA himself says or said in interviews, or what his actors actually more revealingly tend to say in interviews about working with him. Just his like sort of method of directing and what makes it so unique, and what makes it this, like his movies just have this very specific thing that other movies just don't fucking have, or very rarely have, and he'll have it for 2.5 hours straight, right? And it's that sort of ability to create a sense of unpredictability and chaos and surprise, not like in a plot twisty way. It's almost never anything to do with plot. Just in the sense of like, I don't know where any of these scenes are going to go. And I love that. And I think, and just the ability to kind of almost like show off, but like in a subtle, but very like, it's a grabbing way. And I think the best example, and we'll talk about some of the other great examples, but the best example, and ironically, the one that has the closest tie to Phantom Thread, both in the way it's constructed and shot, but also who's the subject of it, is the scene with the agent. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh my gosh, Grady. I love her.
Yeah.
She was incredible.
I mean, tell me, yeah, I knew, I was like, even incredible. Dana's gonna hate on this movie. There's no way she's gonna tell me she didn't like this.
She was great. No, she was
fantastic.
No, yeah.
That so whole scene, that actress was... yeah, that actress, Harriet Sansom Harris. So she's in Phantom Thread, as you might recall, as the woman Barbara Rose, who's like drunk. Mm-hmm. And like, get that dress off of her. So she kind of like, this is her 2 for 2 now.
And disgrace the dress.
Playing these like very seemingly unhinged women who are, oh, my Siri just went off. Very like unusual, unhinged women that are like,
you said unhinged like, woman and Siri turned on?
Yes, that literally happened just now.
Come on, Siri, you're better than that.
Oh God, don't keep saying it. It might hear you. That was very ironic. But yeah, so I guess, I mean, look, I assume if you're listening to this, you've either seen the movie or you just don't care about the spoiler warning. But I'll describe the scene anyway. So Harriet Sansom Harris plays this woman, Mary Grady. who's like I think she's an agent or a casting agent.
Oh, casting.
Well, no, in this movie.
Not talking about Phantom Thread. Got it.
Yeah, no, I'm talking in Licorice Pizza. And so kind of like towards the midpoint of the movie, Gary, or it's actually Alana, comes to Gary. It's like, oh, I can do this acting thing. Like, you think you can do it? I can do it. Like, I got it. He's like, okay, well, take me to this agent or whatever. They go there, and Gary on the way is like, whatever you do, just say yes to anything they ask you. And I'm sure, Dana, you know exactly what he's talking about.
100%. You can always learn it.
Like, and I remember I'd go through quote resumes on the back of the headshots of like actors. And I'm like, there's no way they do half this stuff. So it's just like kind of stupid ultimately, but it's like, nevertheless, everyone puts all this crazy shit on there, all these languages they don't really speak. And I'm like, what? All of it. And so they get this dead to rights in this scene because rather than just being ahead, like, well, I guess it's implied she's looking at one and already asking questions. She's like, so it's like Gary, you're sitting there. And this is what I mean about the callback to the way it's constructed to Phantom Thread. This movie, unlike PTA's more recent films, hasn't been too fixated on like the very tight close up, what's the term I'm looking for? Shallow depth of field, kind of like really intense flat background, usually white, almost like to just like totally be like the only thing you're supposed to be thinking about is the minute expressions on this person's face, and it's a little bit intense. They don't really do that shot anywhere else in this movie. They do it here. It's just like it would be in The Master or Inherent Vice or Phantom, right? And the whole thing is she's like reading the headshot. She's like nodding in the most like weird ass way where you're like, how many fucking Xanax or like is this woman on? Like she's just like nodding. Her eyes are kind of like glazed over. She's like, it says you speak Portuguese. Yes. I love it. And she's like, I could tell you're a fighter. You got it. And she's like, you have a very Jewish nose. I like that. That's in right now. It's just like so weird and intense.
She said she's like a bulldog with a Jewish nose.
You're like a bulldog with a
bulldog. And I'm like, whoa.
So,
and she's like, yes.
So that's what I mean. It's like this very, and it's notable because she's in this, and I'm forgetting the actor's name, but the guy who plays the Japanese restaurant owner. From Best in Show. Right, that's what I was about to say. Both these actors are known to be in like improv comedy based things, like Christopher Guest movies, etc. Like pick your modern like documentary era sitcom, and that's intentional because PTA. The way he's directed, we talked a lot about this on Phantom Thread, so I'm not going to overly belabor the point. I think it's more relevant there. But he's like looking at these actors to kind of, like I said, push them into weird places where everything's kind of unpredictable and they're not sure when he's ever going to yell cut, so they just keep going. Right? And that's kind of how I feel like you get scenes like this. It's just like, she's just like keeping it going. She's just keeping it going. She's keeping it going. And Alana and Gary don't know how long she's going to keep it going. And they're just like, what is happening right now? And she's like, I don't know what's happening right now, but I'm on the camera. So it feels that way. And I think that's the energy that works so well. Now, the other two places where the film obviously has major energy is when it comes to its sort of big name actor episodes, because that's the other thing I was going to say. The whole construction of the movie, which again lines up with what I was saying about how the story came from Gary, etc., is very kind of episodic, which isn't to say that it doesn't have an overall sort of thread or structure. We're going to get to all that, but I like that episodic nature is very fitting with PTA's recent output. It's like, again, I think it lends itself to the whole methodology of scene construction and acting and performance and unpredictability that I've been talking about. So this case, you start with the quote Jack Holden scene. I say quote Jack because that's an example of the character is William Holden, the actor, and they just changed his name to Jack as a way to, I guess, get away with not necessarily having his estate
come after him. Yeah, sure.
But if you don't know, we talked about William Holden very briefly in the context of Sunset Boulevard when we talked about Mulholland Drive in Lynchtober. But it's interesting because that's mainly how I know William Holden. William Holden has a whole career of like weird sort of like exactly what the character in Licorice Pizza describes of like these sort of like foreign adventure films like that like kind of turned him into this sort of like strange like traveling man's man, like ultra masculine kind of like hero of the era of like the 60s and 50s. And at this point it's like an older version of him in 1973, like sitting down just being like recapping his story. That's where the Tom Waits character comes in, as some director that he's worked with before, knows him pretty well. And it's like immediately like proving to you that, like, I think in PTA's mind, no, Hollywood, I don't know if this is a real story that he got from someone or Gary, but like proving that just like the whole idea, no, the Valley's the real Hollywood. He's like, the people of Encino, stop whatever you're eating right now and come out and watch the amazing Jack Holden.
I mean, it's true because it's where Hollywood like can relax, because the paparazzi don't go to the Valley.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly feels that way in the context of this movie, for sure.
For sure.
And it's just like, yeah, exactly. You couldn't do this now because it'd just be all over the internet, or maybe that would be the point of doing it now. I don't know. Right. But like back then it'd be like, if you weren't there, you didn't see it. Mm-hmm. Right. Which is wild. And I mean, that whole sequence is amazing, including the finale part of it where after Gary runs to her, you get the Let Me Roll It music cue from Paul McCartney. It's great. Yeah, so that scene, I mean, you already talked about your love of Waits, that shot with the lighting, which I couldn't agree more about with the smoke.
Amazing.
Yeah.
If anyone deserves that entrance, it's him too.
Yeah, just Sean Penn on the motorcycle, because that's the thing, William Holden known to do these motorcycle guy. Like I'm coming, Nancy. It's just the insanity of the fact that he lets her fly off the back of his.
Doesn't even notice. He doesn't even notice.
Doesn't care in the slightest. Yeah. Like it's just
she was
totally
a prop for him all along.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Bradley Cooper as John Peters is a whole nother story, and I love how these scenes happen very close together. And it's like you're moving into this next chapter, and you're like, oh shit, now we're at John Peters and this shit. And it's like, oh, wild. So I don't know. Well, so let me ask you this, because you just mentioned a little bit what I thought of the Penn Wade stuff, but like, what do you think of the whole Bradley Cooper chapter? Like, give me your thoughts on it. Was it positive for you, negative? What
it was positive. I thought he was a great character. I felt that I had met someone like him, just so eccentric and felt like they're so much better than everyone else, and their own agenda is the only agenda that matters. Probably super coked up and all like, rage filled for no real reason. So for those instances, I felt he created a well-rounded character. I don't know if he was based on a real person or not.
No,
he is. Barbra Streisand was dating at the time.
John Peters is a real person. That's his real name. And part of the reason they really get his real name, I'll talk about this in a moment, is that
family was cool with it?
PTA called the real John Peters, still alive, and asked him. And he had just one request, which I'll reveal in a moment. It's very funny.
Please tell me that it was that Bradley Cooper played. Did he pick Bradley Cooper?
No, I think that might have already been decided, but like
that would have been really funny.
He definitely was into that idea.
Bradley Cooper.
Well, okay, so let me give you a little context on John Peters. I'm sure some of this will be familiar with you. So there's a movie, a Hal Ashby movie in the earlier mid-70s called Shampoo. Have you ever seen this movie with Goldie Hawn? Oh,
Shampoo
man. With Warren Beatty, Goldie Hawn, and Julie Christie. You would love it. If you're into the most 70s ass movie ever about 70s hairstyling, you need to see Shampoo.
Don't threaten me with big hair or a good time.
So this is what I'm getting at. John Peters, the character Warren Beatty plays in that movie is inspired by John Peters. John Peters, before he became a movie producer and Barbra Streisand's boyfriend, was a hairstylist. So
awesome.
Bradley Cooper's hair, by the way, that entire white outfit he's wearing, I've seen it, the real photo of John Peters in that exact outfit with that exact haircut.
Oh my God.
It's amazing. It's like it feels 70s OD. That's because this is the guy who was the mascot for 70s OD. He was the one making all those styles trendy. That was his whole thing. It was like, yeah, man, you gotta have like your hair flowing, you gotta be like kind of like open chest, you gotta be like flowy. It's like that whole thing was him. He was the guy styling all the stars. So
got it.
And it's funny because people have compared this movie to Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. We all know PTA was obsessed with that movie. It's both their 9 features. It's like he almost like made this in response in some ways, some people might say. I think that's a little bit like it's more coincidental, I feel like, ultimately.
They have similar vibes.
They have similar vibes, but
they're completely different.
Well,
stories.
but here's a direct connection though, or like at least again, not necessarily intentional, but just a fact of the matter connection. So John Peters, the real John Peters, like I said, he's a hairstylist. He was mentored by Jay Sebring, who's the character that Emile Hirsch plays in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, who is also very influential and part of the basis for a movie like Shampoo and like, styling Star, styling Sharon Tate. So like that's this whole continuity of like it's weird to think because I just don't know if this is true anymore. It doesn't feel like it is. But hairstylists in that period were like the kings of Hollywood, or queens if they were women. But most of them were men. Which is very
well. Even now, the big celebrity stylists are men. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the guys who do Kim Kardashian's hair and Gigi Hadid's hair, they're all men.
I didn't know. You would know better
I follow
than
them
me.
All on Instagram.
Well, there you go.
Even the
they're
makeup artists. I mean, get Mario Danovich. He's created a whole. He's the reason that all of women's faces are so chiseled nowadays. It's the makeup.
God.
It's the makeup style that he started to. It's contouring. He started making contouring for everybody, instead of just secrets for Hollywood to trick the camera into thinking you're more skinny.
It's amazing. Yeah. No. So yeah, that whole world. I mean, maybe that you're just making me think maybe we should get an update to these like Shampoo things. But yeah. So obviously he styled Barbra Streisand. Then they started dating. He started producing movies. The rest is history. But John Peters is just also kind of known as he's presenting this movie, and this is where I get into the point of like what his actual context with PTA was. He's a little too proud of being this ladies' man playboy guy to this day. It's like, oh God, this dude is from a different time. He's just always like, yeah, I was banging this broad, and like that's how he does. Like that's his attitude. And so his whole thing was when PTA calls him to ask him like, hey, so I wrote this, you're in it, like, can we use your real name? Like, I more or less know this really happened, but is it like, all right? He was like, you can use it under one condition. Cause he like the script's like, it's like, you got to use my pickup line. It's like, your pickup line? He's like, I would always tell girls, let's get peanut butter sandwiches. Which is the weirdest, most random thing ever. But actually, in this scene, where the last point you see Bradley Cooper, the whole thing, is remember when Alana's sitting on the sidewalk while Gary and his friends are like doing the stupid, like, you remember what I'm talking about. John Peters like walks by and he's like still like aggro mode, like you said, like hulking out, like in some coked up rage fit, like throwing a trash can through a thing.
Well, not only that, he's a mess.
He's a complete mess.
His pants are ripped.
Yeah.
His pants are all the way ripped, all the way down his thigh, up to his thigh. He's got dirt all over his face. He's scratched. He looks like he just climbed out of a ditch.
Yeah.
And he switches directions, right?
He switches directions the minute some girls walk by. And he literally, if you listen, you could hear him say, hey, like, mention the peanut butter sandwiches. So, okay, that was actually...
Look, there are worse pickup lines. I have to say, in 2022, really? It's gotten an upgrade. Now it's, hey, do you want some chicken nuggets?
Oh, no. Lame.
And 9 girls out of 10 will be like, actually, I do want some chicken nuggets.
Now,
I'm telling you.
I'll say this. No, there's one other stipulation I should mention. is he wanted one specific change or thing added too. Was in the scene, and it's funny, this is the scene you brought up. Now we're finally getting back to it, where you said she says the wrong age or says the right age, and it was like the reveal, depending on how you look at it. He goes in the car, and John Peters, the real John Peters, looked at the scene, and he was like, he thought his character, him, was being a little bit too like mean. And he's like, that's not what I would do. And he's like, and Paul was like, well, what would you do? He's like, oh, I would try to sleep with him. It's like, again, the guy's like way too proud of like his like sort of like chauvinistic kind of practices, but he's just like, well,
especially he's supposed to be Barbra Streisand's boyfriend.
Well, I mean, his whole point is like, I cheat on her all the time. Are you kidding me? I can do whatever I want. Like, it's like this is his whole thing. He's like, it was the 70s, man. It was like, I was bagging everybody. Like, it was like, what? He's a character. He's still like, I looked this up. Like, he's still his like most recent wife, who's like wife number like 5 or 6 or whatever. It's like some girl's like 40 years younger than him, of course. So he's still at the game. That's what I'm getting at. But yeah, so
what Babs has to say about his part in this, because he must have told her, like, because he says her name in it. The whole first scene is him describing the proper way to pronounce her name.
Oh yeah.
So she must have had some.
That's a real thing too, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. It is.
Yeah, he was like very corrective of people to say her name right. So that's amazing. But okay, so this brings us finally, because we've talked about these other actors, big name people. But this movie is actually a movie about, and this is how we're going to get into the rest of it. 2 leads played by people who have never led a movie before, or really even been in movies before. And that's Cooper Hoffman as Gary and Alana HAIM as Alana King. And even though, when I say Alana King, I mean, she's just Alana HAIM. Like, that's the whole thing. They kept all the HAIM family's actual names. They just are themselves, basically, just transplanted into the 70s and with no band. Basically, is the whole conceit. Like, who would these people be if there was no music in their lives?
Right, if they had no talent.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about no talent, no musical talent. Let's put it that way. Now, what did you think of these two? And you can start with either, but I want you to touch on both, because you didn't really talk about it. You talked about how you don't like the Alana character, but I wasn't sure if you were saying you didn't like the Alana performance or.
No, I thought Alana had a great performance. I don't think it's necessarily her fault that she was annoying. I think she played annoying very well. I don't know if that was the intent. I thought that Cooper Hoffman knocked it out of the park. Number one. Nice. I think that is a super talented bloodline. How can you, I mean, it's a lot of pressure, and I don't know how it must feel for him to do something like this without his father around. It must have been hard at all to just be like, you know what, I'm going to follow in his footsteps and he won't be here to help me or see me. That must be tough. I imagine it was,
but
I do think he made him proud. I think he brought a lot of life to this character, because essentially he's this likable douchebag kid, you know? He gets hand jobs from all the girls that are older than him. He's, you know, kind of skeezy a little. He's always he was looking at the red-haired girl to ask her out. He's, you know, he's got a wandering eye, but he's 15. So it's like, well, what are you going to do? So he did a really good job.
By the way, do you know who that was? Do you know who that was in that scene that you're referring to with the hand job bit? The actor?
Don't know if I recognized her.
I mean, I recognized her, but I didn't know who she was. It was funny after I saw my sister, of course, because she keeps score of all this shit. So she's like, that's Steven Spielberg's daughter.
Oh, you're kidding. That's awesome.
Yeah.
The one that says, you want to take over giving him hand jobs then?
Yeah. That was a weird scene.
Yeah, so despite his like kind of skeeviness, he's like a little kid, but he also has a very likable quality about him. He is a charming motherfucker. This kid charmed the pants off of us, but also it was necessary for him to charm Alana. You know what I mean? The story doesn't continue if he's not as charming as he is. Then it really doesn't make sense what she's doing. And here I'm like, man, he's charming. He's making her feel good about herself. He's noticing things about her that no one's ever noticed. So you kind of see why she wants to go with him, because he's doing all of these things. He's extremely charming. I think he did a great job at that, especially for, no offense to him, but a kid that you wouldn't necessarily look at and be like, oh, what a Casanova. Oh, what a charmer that kid is. It's what he brings to it. It's his personality and the way he delivers things with confidence that I think I was really impressed. He did a great job.
Yeah, no, well, definitely, back up what you're saying there. I love them both. And I think it's fitting because like, I'm a PTA fan, like it's not unrelated that I would be incredibly biased towards these two in the same way he himself is, which is why he wanted them in his movie. I love Philip Seymour Hoffman. He was my favorite actor. He's the star of my favorite movie. When I heard his son was going to be in this movie, I immediately was like, I don't even know. There was no question to me about whether he's going to be good or not. That was not my concern. I was like, I can't wait to see that. And it means a lot to me personally. Ditto, Alana means a lot to me too. As I said, I'm openly a big fan of HAIM. I'm a big fan of her. One could say I'm an even bigger fan of her now that I've seen this movie, because now I really do think she should be in more movies. I expect she'll be in more PTA movies at the very least. But
agreed.
Both of them probably. This feels like kind of a new beginning actually for him in that sense. Where he's like got two new people to keep working with if he so chooses to. And I imagine he will, because it seems like he's had more fun making this movie than he's had in the last 25 years or ever, maybe since Boogie Nights. Cause like, honestly, Magnolia was a very difficult and depressing thing for him to do. It was dealing with his difficult and depressing thing.
What about Moonlight Kingdom?
That's a Wes Anderson movie.
Oh, dang. You're right. Got the Andersons mixed up.
No. I can't even believe I know. I understand that. I can't even believe you said that for a second.
I was like, wait, isn't that an Anderson movie?
No, because like the idea of Paul Thomas Anderson being the one who made Moonrise Kingdom. I like Moonrise Kingdom. We talked about this. But like if he no.
I take it back.
That's like saying to me, that's like saying like, oh yeah, like when Michael Bay directed Empire Strikes Back.
Come on, it's not that bad.
No, I mean it's not even about being bad. I like Wes Anderson movies a lot. We've talked about this, and I like Moonrise Kingdom, though it's definitely not my favorite. Anyway, no, I think that Magnolia was kind of a depressing thing. And you look at all the movie sets: Punch Drunk Love, There Will Be Blood, The Master, Inherent Vice, which maybe that skews a little more to the fun side, but I don't know. I didn't get the impression he was feeling that way necessarily about any of it. And then Phantom Thread. And he loved making all these movies, as far as I know. They were deep acts of love. He was very passionate about them. But none of it seemed particularly fun, if you will. And this in the way, one. Oh, yeah, that's a good point. He talked a bit about, a lot of people have been asking about the running, so he's explained it. And there's an interesting story there. I wasn't planning on talking about it, but I'll save it because I think it will fit in a little better, actually tie into very directly something I want to talk about. But yeah, so I just think that it needs to be said that this movie, and I think the way he's acted about it publicly, it just ties together. He's had a lot of fun. I think it is, in that sense, perhaps a new chapter. I don't know what he's going to do next. I don't know if it's going to be more in this direction, more in tying into what he was trying to do in the previous direction, maybe a synthesis of both. That's what I expect more than anything else, because I think that he is a synthesis type of filmmaker, clearly. So yeah, all that is said, but it's really the story of these two people and these two performances, Alana and Cooper as Gary. Notice that, by the way, Cooper as Gary Cooper. Coincidence, I guess, but
yeah,
still very funny how that works.
Very funny.
Now that's irrelevant too, because here's where I'm actually going with all this. Now we're on the real page. This is what I've been wanting to talk about. What is Licorice Pizza? What the fuck is this movie about? Like, where's it really coming from? Where does it fit into movies? And I think if there's going to be an overarching theme to our season 2, we'll see if this keeps coming up. But I just feel more and more interested in talking about this than I've been in the past, which is understanding genre and genre context. Like we went heavy on that last week, and I think it's coming up. Well, my take on Licorice Pizza is very much tied to the same kind of idea, because this movie is a particular genre and like a dead genre. This is a neo version of this genre, even though it's a period piece set, 40, 50 years ago. This is a screwball movie. Now,
oh, yeah?
Yes, 100%. In every
I would
possible
think a coming
way.
of age, something.
Well, coming of age, it definitely is a coming of age story too. And we could take that lens of interpreting it as a coming of age story. That would be a fair approach. But it's not the approach I'm taking. And I think the reason why I'm taking the approach I'm taking will reveal itself as I go through it. But Screwball is so Dana, like and this, I swear this isn't a quiz question. I just want to make sure I understand where we're starting from with this. How would you define, because this is a trickier genre than most to like explain or define. Like, how would you explain a screwball movie? Or what does that mean to you?
I mean, I obviously think comedy. I definitely think.
Yeah, that's correct.
I mean, it's
literally called screwball comedies usually. Like, I just call it screwball. I mean, I think like I'm trying to de-emphasize the comedy.
Not to like bring Bradley Cooper back, but like hangover type movies. I feel they're like screwball-y because it's just like, what are they even doing? There's just these crazy people doing crazy things. What else would I think? Like maybe Big Daddy's kind of
Okay. Let me stop you right here though. No, I love it. If you want to talk Adam Sandler screwball, okay, here's the thing. I think the term screwball, given how it's more typical, forget the movie genre, how it's be more typically, it's not a common term, period. I mean, maybe in the drink world, but which you would know more about than I. I think it implies, I think you're thinking like goofy, lewd, raunchy kind of comedies.
Yeah. That's kind of where my mind goes when I think of Screwball.
So the Screwball I'm talking about actually is not that at all. The Screwball
like Weekend at Bernie's?
It's Weekend at no, not really. So you need to think, if you want to think Screwball, here's a good place to start.
Okay.
Rom-coms from a long time ago is really kind of where you want to start. And what the difference between, quote, the modern rom-com that you would get in like the 80s, 90s, and 2000s versus like a screwball movie from the real period of screwball, we're going to talk about this, it is in the 30s and 40s and 50s, and not even so much the 50s, really just the 30s and 40s. And like these are movies starring Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn.
Okay.
Including like Bringing Up Baby being one of them that has them both. But I'll explain what it is, but like, okay, there's this movie. I don't know if you ever saw it. This is like the example of a modern neo-screwball film that's a little bit too tongue-in-cheek, if you ask me. And I've only saw this movie once, like 20 years ago, and I don't remember particularly liking it that much, though I remember being shocked how much I did like it, because it was one of those things where I saw it on HBO. I was like, what the hell is this? It's like, oh, no, I can't watch it. This is kind of like a rom-com. And then I was like, oh, I actually like this, kind of. I forget what it's called. Man, I need to look this up. But it's this movie with Ewan McGregor and I think Renee Zellweger.
Huh.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
It's called, let me find it. This is really important, I think, if Down with Love. That's what it was. The movie came out in 2003. It's actually directed by Peyton Reed, who directed all the Ant-Man films for Marvel. Look at that.
Oh.
Makes sense, actually, now that I think about it. Okay. I'm going to... So... Down with Love is let me just actually read you the Wikipedia description. Like, look this movie up yourself if you can, because I'm shocked you haven't seen this. No, I don't know. I just expect that like people who of your age who probably watch a decent share of rom-coms have seen this movie.
I watch some rom-coms, but I'm not like a rom-com person. Oh my gosh, I've seen this.
Okay. See, I knew it.
Dang it. You're right. I've seen this. And they even dress, they're all like in the 50s and 60s. So glamorous. I remember Renee Zellweger's I remember her wardrobe from this movie more than I remember this movie, if I'm being honest.
Fair enough.
Her wardrobe was impeccable.
So
yes, I do remember it.
Down with Love is an example of like
intolerable cruelty. Does that
intolerable cruelty? Yes, that's an example of like a revivalist Screwball.
Yeah, that makes me think of that, of this like vibes. Sure.
Here's the theme of Screwball, and this will make where I think I'm going with this in terms of Licorice Pizza more clear. Their battle of the sexes movies. See what I'm getting at? Like it's like about basically it's like there's a woman and there's a man, and they're both kind of representative of their genre, gender, and their gender identities, and sort of like their cultural sort of power positions. And obviously, since women are subservient to men in this traditional sense, it's usually about the women rebelling and the man having basically because in order for it to be the competitive thing it is, the woman has to be very cunning and clever and therefore able to actually put the man down. And then the man's like, what the hell? I can't be put down. So he has to fight back. And that's kind of the basic flow. So if you go back to like I said, because even with Down with Love, it's still not quite on the level. It's like clearly very grounded in the Screwball sensibilities, but it's kind of based off of a more 1950s, 60s, obviously literally set in the 60s, kind of sort of update even to that structure that is like, again, a little bit more forward like at the time. Whereas if you go back to the 30s and 40s, we're talking very different sort of norms even then comparatively, right? And so when I think of a film, like, have you ever seen His Girl Friday?
Yes.
Yeah. So Howard Hawks is kind of like one of the pioneers in terms of like this type of filmmaking. And a lot of what people recognize about Screwball, and I think you could argue this is like Licorice Pizza in some ways, but very much not like it in others, is this emphasis on tit for tat kind of dialogue. It's why people like Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn are kind of like icons of this genre, because they're like, they talk fast, they
yeah, there's
the mid-Atlantic accent, all of the above, right?
As an actor, they would talk with no space, we would say. So like you jump on, as soon as they say their last word, you say your first word. Like there's no space in between dialogue. You just jump on everything. And then back and forth. Anything you can do, I can do better mentality for this kind of get you movie, but then we fall in love at the end. I see where you're getting.
Well,
at.
see, okay. You actually said the magic phrase, and then you fall in love at the end. Because this is ultimately the ultimate point of Screwball, and also what Licorice Pizza has to add or subvert, as I'm going with this, about this tradition. Okay, so like I was mentioning, you have this idea of the battle of the sexes. I'm going to just read, because it's interesting. Because there's certain things about that I wouldn't quite agree with or quite pinpoint the same way, but I think it's just interesting to read the top line of the Wikipedia page for Screwball Comedy. Screwball Comedy is a subgenre of romantic comedy that became popular during the Great Depression, originating in the early 1930s and thriving until the early 1940s, satirizing the traditional love story. Many secondary characteristics of this genre are similar to film noir. That's where I get to like roll, I'm like, okay, I think I know what you mean, but that's a little weird to put it that way. But it distinguished itself for being characterized by a female who dominates the relationship with the male central character whose masculinity is challenged. The two engage in a humorous battle of the sexes, which was a new theme for Hollywood and audiences at the time. The genre also features romantic attachments between members of different social classes, as in It Happened One Night and My Man Godfrey.
My Man Godfrey.
You seen that?
I love that movie.
Have you seen the other movie I just mentioned, It Happened One Night?
Yes, but I've only seen it once. I've seen My Man Godfrey probably like 17 times. I love that movie.
I remember I watched It Happened in One Night in film school, and it was
I think I had to watch it for acting class.
As one of like the earliest truly successful hit talkies, and also kind of the basically, which again, when you think of Screwball, the other important that ties in because it's also considered like one of the first Screwball movies. Screwball movies happen because of talkies. because it's like now characters are talking. So it's all about dialogue. It's all about this. It's all about like discussion. It's all about like, you know, playing that out. And like, it's almost like, oh my God, I can finally talk for the first time when I talk really.
But then you run into the would that it were situation.
Oh, that's
would that it were.
Would that it were so simple.
Twas that it was so simple.
Yeah, that's post Screwball. That's like those are like chamber movies. Okay, so that's what and we're getting to John.
I was just saying some of the silent film actors had trouble with the talking.
Oh no, you're absolutely right. That's a perfect example of the conflict there. And then you have movies like The Artist that try to show this on screen or whatever. That was a real difficult point, and like new stars emerge. And it's also noted that like It Happened One Night is pre-code co-produced by actually Capra directed it. And it kind of sets the whole tone too for this whole idea of like, okay, there's some tensions here. The characters are sleeping in two separate beds, but like at least it's part of the story here. It's like it's kind of like, this is what I mean. It's like this setup of like, okay, so you have this idea, you have the battle of the sexes. The basic premise is guy comes in, women kind of threatens him because the woman is kind of asserting herself against the norms of the social order, or she's of a higher social class, sometimes both. And it's kind of this thing where the man tries to reassert dominance, but the woman is like able to fight back. So it creates this sort of argumentative tension, and sometimes there's farcical situations and misunderstandings and comedy of errors involving other people or between them.
Or misunderstandings.
And eventually, because this is the point, and this is even how it was framed to me when, you know, the professors were explaining It Happened One Night. All that sort of like, because like there's a lot of sexual tension involved, and there's a lot of playing that sexual tension, and there's a lot of almost celebration of this idea of women overturning the normal order of like, oh, like, you know, His Girl Friday. It's about a woman who works and is divorced. These are things that are like social no-nos. Okay. And you even look at the behind the scenes personalities of your Katharine Hepburns or Rosalind's. And it's
we talk about the pants too.
The women wearing pants.
Well, Katharine specifically fought to wear pants. It is said that they told her she would not wear pants on a certain production. It may have actually been It Happened One Night. And
Claudia Colbert.
His Girl Friday. It may have actually been his
Girl
Friday.
I think the movie.
Which one are we talking about?
I wasn't talking about any movie specifically, but Katharine Hepburn's in a lot of them. She's bringing a baby. You could use that, but I don't know if she's wearing pants now.
Well, there's some specific story that I recall. Who knows if it's true or not? But I really like to believe that it's true. That they told her she wasn't allowed to wear pants. She had to wear a skirt, and she said, "No, you'll bring me my pants." And when they didn't do it, she walked around set in her underwear until they brought her pants because she refused to wear a dress.
Well, if you see her famous, for me, like ever famous entrance scene when she's played by Cate Blanchett in The Aviator, she's golfing wearing pants and a blazer.
Amazing.
And she's like, aren't we a fine pair of misfits? That's my favorite, one of my favorite performances or characters ever. Because I don't even really care that much about the real Katharine Hepburn, really. But the version played by Cate Blanchett in The Aviator is just one of my all-time favorite characters to quote.
I mean, supposedly that's how she really was.
No, I'm sure that's how she really was. I'm saying that like it's just one of my favorite movie things. Okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, so you have that dynamic, like I said, this transgressive thing, like I said, the real personality of Katharine Hepburn being a person who's kind of like openly kind of bucking against gender norms. Like who knows where she would have ended up in today's environment? You know what I mean? Like it's not hard for me to imagine. But nevertheless, she was already being very transgressive against that at the time. Whether a future or a live version of her would be like, I identify as non-binary or something, like, or any number of things.
Well, supposedly she had a lot of affairs with women.
Wouldn't surprise me. I mean, at least but even being like bisexual beyond that, it's just
she was supposedly part of this group in Hollywood of bisexual actresses called the Sewing Circle.
You know the gossip. I didn't know that.
I know the gossip.
That's cool.
I like the gossip. Okay, so supposedly the sewing circle.
No, they're fascinating.
A bunch of A-list actresses that were on this sewing circle list, and they would, get together for sewing.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Right. So there you go. It's this transgression thing. But the reason, and I'm not just talking pre-code, post-code, the reason ultimately, societally, Hollywood could, quote, get away with exploring these worlds or depicting these worlds or even celebrating these worlds is because the ultimate resolution, and to this point, it grows from a mandate into a fixture of the genre, so that by the time you get to Licorice Pizza, it's like you can't escape it. It's part of the genre, right? Is that it ends with the social order being restored, meaning marriage. Marriage solves everything is the default ending of all Screwball, all romantic comedies really, but just I'm focusing on the Screwball part of it, right? So it's this idea that patriarchy, power, women in the workplace, and conformity, a compromise for society, both economic and moral, the latter serving the former. So, it's like, and you see this as the genre keeps going, it just, like I said, it replicates itself. Like this idea of the formula for these movies is tension, fighting, be it from divorce or single people, battle of the sexes, women overpowering men, blah, blah, blah. But eventually it's resolved with, oh, yes, but we do love each other, so let's get married. No. It's all fine now. It's all fine now. The rest of it's fine. Whatever happens after that is what happens after, but it's fine now. So that's what I'm saying. The ending of Screwball, by definition, is to restore the social order, to restore the power structure, to restore the conformity, even though while the rest of the movie basically entirely exists to subvert it or to explore what's outside of those boundaries. Now, when you get to Licorice Pizza, which again is interesting because it's a movie made in 2021 that takes place in 1973. So it's a period piece. So it's backward looking, but it's still well after the normal Screwball period and setting. And again, it is a movie of today. So either way, it's a future tense to this genre. It's what is it doing? Because whenever I mentioned the whole thing, when I first saw the movie, I felt like I got the 75% and the 25% that I was missing. I was like, I don't know what else is there. And maybe I did get all of it. And if I did, that's a little disappointing, but maybe I see it again, I'll get more. Saw it again, I did get more. And the more I got, to sum it up very briefly, is basically where I left at the first time I saw it was like, I really like this movie. I feel like it's exploring some interesting ideas, but I feel like it doesn't actually conclude. And the actual ending of the movie just feels like it kind of gave up on its more interesting ideas and just diverted into pure genre form, meaning like it just did the genre thing of I understood
ends
it
with
to be kind of a
you.
Screwball movie. Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. And so it just ends like that. And there's nothing said. After watching it again and knowing where it was going the whole time and thinking about it the whole time, I started to see and understand, and then this further unlocked the rest of it too. That no. It is subverting the whole thing by doing the thing. And by doing the thing, it's opening up this whole idea of all the different threads. And that's where I'm going. That's the picture I'm about to paint. So this Licorice Pizza subverts the Screwball genre even though it replicates the end. Because it's the context that's changed. And that context, you mentioned it earlier, and this is obviously where the movie is at its most controversial, but what I'm trying to explain is it has to be in order to make this point, which is it's a context in which the marriage is actually an act of anti-conformity. It's a challenge to the status quo and the limitations of this system, right? And to be specific, what I'm talking about is they're talking about a 15-year-old and let's even take
they can't get married.
28-year-old.
They can't get married. Yeah.
Well, they might be able to.
Well, depending on the state, I guess.
There's ways to get that done.
His mom could sign a paper. His mom could sign a paper.
Either way, their whole point is because it's almost like you're right either way, because the whole point of what I'm saying is instead of marriage or like the consummation being an act of I am now giving up my anti-conformist rebellion and whatever. This is the opposite. This is by them going for it. They are actually fully embracing the anti-conformity of their action and being like, we don't care about the laws of the system. We're doing it anyway. We are actually in opposition. We are outside of those boundaries, not within them. So it's the opposite of the entire genre. It's the antithesis by doing the same replication because the context is different. So, like I said, instead of conforming, it's an act of rebellion, a screw it, which I like as a pun, obviously, screwball, to the system. It's intentionally problematic, right? Like, that's why it's a rebellion. It's a provocation. Like, and I want to clarify this point before I say any more about this. When it comes to this topic of, underage sex, underage marriage, underage romance, grooming, age of consent, power dynamic, all those different things that are related to this. Obviously, it's one of the easiest things to point out is, oh my God, if you flip the genders of these characters, nobody would find this okay.
Exactly.
Well, I don't disagree with that notion at all. I'm not here to say anything, and I'm not here to say it myself, nor am I here to say that the movie says, nor am I here to say Paul Thomas Anderson says. You can make of it all what you will, but I'm certainly not here to say that I morally condone the act of sex with minors and or grooming. It's the movie itself, by its very nature of what it's attempting to do. And again, you could criticize it as like some moral act if you want to moralize filmmaking, which I don't really think is a good idea, but even if you did, right? I mean, I moralize filmmaking in the sense that I moralize the ways I think a film might reflect a societal attitude that's problematic. Like you go back to, I don't even want to open this conversation really, but there's some weird movies. Let's just say, I'll say this for a separate podcast. There's some weird movies that are made in the 90s and 80s and 70s that like just the premise alone is so insanely problematic. You'd be like, what? And like this is
Taxi Driver.
To that. Yeah.
Lolita, Taxi Driver.
Well, okay. Both those movies at the very, hold on. Both those movies, this is why I don't even want to open this conversation, because both of those movies at the very least present their characters as amoral or villainous in some degree. Movies I'm kind of thinking of in my head don't. The movies I'm talking about actively act like their characters are doing reasonably good things or don't seem to question them at all. But you watch them today and you'd be like, oh my God. So yeah, I'll say that. But I'm saying that this movie knows when it's being made. It knows its environment. You could say it navigates these lines however you want, but my point is, it is by its very nature and by the very nature of the argument and thesis I'm going to provide important. It cannot be removed from the equation. It's the kind of the whole point of the equation is to say this is a romance that's illegal. Like the only other ways they could do this is if they set it in the South and it was a black girl and a white guy. And then they could be the same age. But you see what I'm saying? It needs to be something where the act of the consummation or the marriage would be an
society doesn't approve
act. Exactly. Otherwise, the whole point I'm saying wouldn't work. So let's now break that down, because the actual point of why I think this is important isn't just the movie, it's the story of the movie. I'm saying that what I feel like PTA is articulating in this movie, or I'm saying is being articulated about this movie, whether he's fully aware of it or not. I think he's a very smart guy, thinks about this stuff very deeply, whether he wants to explain this to other people or not. So that this movie actually is a deep commentary on the nature of how our society has always functioned and worked historically, and like how that there's this tension and contradiction to that that is actually being explored and broken down in the sort of forces of this movie. So this is going to sound maybe a little bit like I'm not even talking about the movie for a minute here, but I swear it's like very important to get all these like terms and ideas out there, and then you'll start to see how it fits into the movie, right? Like one-to-ones here. There's like a stand-in for everything I'm about to say. So basically, like you can divide society into like the current state of society, it's post-civilization. We have civilization. It's post-markets. We have markets. It's certainly post-capitalism. That's the system that functions between the civilization and markets, right? And it's found on this fundamental structural mechanism to manipulate, weaponize, organize, and ultimately temper libido, meaning like your sex drive, your sex desire, your desire for sexual pleasure, your sexual expression. And that happens through these, this is the key point, through these three different, I'd say, competing mechanisms. And they are depression, repression, and dominance. And this is contrary to how humanity would have existed before, like I said, civilization, markets, or certainly capitalism, meaning like if you go back to prehistory or like tribal societies or things that it still might exist today in certain forms, and that's how we can kind of understand this. These were our societies as just shaped, you could say naturally, though I don't like to use that term, by evolution and natural selection and just normal societal development pre those changes, right? That had this ramification that almost can't be undone, or can be undone, but it's very difficult. It's like this, our current paradigm is very different than that. And so the difference, before I get too far in it, is the difference of those restraints. You had a society that wasn't trying to constantly control sex through depression, repression, and dominance. And then the society that I'm not saying was totally free or loose, but certainly a lot freer and looser than everything that followed, right? And this, the reality is, if you live in our society today, or as it's been for hundreds of years in one form or another, you don't really have a choice. You have to exist within the restraints, even if they're just self-imposed, or even if it's just like in your mind, like we've mentioned free will, the fact that I don't really believe in it. So that's a separate point. But like, even if you do think that that's some degree of illusion, you're certainly boxed in terms of like what you think are your choices here.
Right. We expect you to wear clothes if you go out.
We expect you. That's maybe the most basic and least controversial data.
Basic thing. Everybody and that's the thing that we've all agreed on. Everybody's like, hey, we should cover up, right? And everyone's like, yeah, actually, not because I'm ashamed, but I don't want to look at you. Or like whatever.
Well, you see where I'm going, because like I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to get too specific.
But like there supposedly are places where that is not the norm. There's societies. There are societies where it's like, why are you covering your breasts? That's weird. They're supposed to be out so your kids can get them.
I'll just say this. I'm a bit biased because I'm a long-standing believer that like those societies have a better idea about this stuff than where we're at.
They probably absolutely do. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, which again, isn't to say, because this is why I don't want to get too specific about how any of this directly maps onto conversations about things like age of consent or all those different things, because I think that is actually a very complicated topic. But I'll let everyone who's listening do their own sort of connection however they want. I think because like where I'm going is more like the sort of top level of that. But yeah, you're exactly right with that point. And whether you decide it's okay to be nude or not, like I said, is filtered through one of these three competing mechanisms of depression, repression, and dominance. And all the divisions and tensions, both sexual and other, can be defined through these three competing mechanisms. Because I'm saying I'm defining it by sex, but like key flash, and this is what Licorice Pizza, I think, is saying, sex moves everything around us, okay? So everything, even money, they say cash moves everything around me. No. That's still one step ahead. Go back a step. Why do you want money? Because you want to fuck. Okay? Seriously. So that's what I'm getting at. And that's what Licorice Pizza understands. It's like, no. Before there's money, there's sex. Before there was money, there was sex. Okay? So that's what's actually in us. That's what's actually governing how we behave. And everything after that is just added on layers to that idea, which is why what's controlling us is ultimately the control on that sex drive. So in Licorice Pizza, each of the three mechanisms is represented by an institutionalized class or competing interests. So here's where the code starts to get a little more specific. So depression is represented by what I'm calling the labor class or the labor class. Repression is represented by the political class, and dominance is represented by the entrepreneurial class or the business class. And these classes and mechanisms, correlations correspond to how the classes and associated institutions function in the real world, the way they limit and or harness libido to their ends, right? That's what I'm saying is that like the sex, because the sex is at the root of everything, even when you're like talking about negotiating, like whether you like do anything, it's in there somewhere, no matter how repressed or like back-ended it's, right? So this film is like kind of like a shortcut to illustrate where it's like all those layers still exist on top of it, but because you're talking about a horny teenager and a very off-brand adult, the layers are a lot closer together than they are in other contexts. And that's why you can see how they function more clearly. This is because the film is arguing that the libido is the ultimate force in all human existence, irregardless of the limits of society. Society imposes its limits as a means to harness the natural energy and the direction of its own self-interest and survival. It's kind of like a parasite. It's like, that's what I'm saying. Money, politics, all these other things exist as like a parasite to draw your energy that you just want to be putting towards sex and who you're having sex with to all these other things that serve its purposes, not yours. So the story itself, right? Now, this is how I start to explain how the characters map onto this, right? So the story follows Gary and Alana. Gary's the male, Alana's the female, and respectively, they're engaged in the battle of sexes as per the screwball genre, right? So the basic premise of the genre is you have to have your male, you have to have your female, they have to be in this battle of the sexes. So at the start of the story, Gary, while exhibiting the traits of someone who's in this entrepreneurial class, and therefore he's limiting his libido through the mechanism of dominance, or you could say vice versa, he's limiting his libido through the dominance and therefore is performing this entrepreneurial class. Like he fancies himself as businessman. He's not necessarily yet, again, at the very start of the story. Keeping the latter order of operations in mind, it's really the case that functionally Gary is still tied into the labor class because he's a child actor. And therefore he limits his libido through depression. And we kind of see this in some of those early scenes, like him going to the casting call and being rejected. He's getting too big. He's like growing out of being able to just do this job as a job the way he had been doing it. And it's depressing. And the whole thing is depressing, right? I think one of the most depressing moments in the film early on is, skipping ahead a little bit, but like when he realizes that Alana is with his, what's that guy's name? The other actor, and he's just sitting there eating his burger.
Eating his cheeseburger. Like, he's like, can we just go home?
It's so depressing.
Can we eat this at home?
It's so depressing.
He picks the better looking kid actor was probably older.
Yeah. Yeah, he's older, but he's a fucking Lance.
Again,
that's what his name is.
Alana still picked a kid actor to go out with and hold hands with. Let's drop that right there.
Yes. Okay. I know. You look.
I'm
we
still
want to
mad
turn
at
this
her.
into.
Look, this is why I'm really mad at her. That I forgot to mention. This is why I think it's creepy. The most handsome guy in the movie. She stands him up. The guy that works with her at the volunteering for the senator or the congressman. He asks her out, and she ditches him.
Yes.
But
the reason why, Dana, the reason why it's going to take me another few minutes to get there, but the reason why
I didn't want to forget
where
that she stood up the most attractive guy in this movie.
No, you're 100% right. But see, that's why I'm saying it's going to, why is very important. It's going to be explained because she's not following things like attraction. She's following a different sort of way of seeing the world at that point is more important to her at that juncture. So the thing is, Gary, like I said, he's laboring. He's a child actor, but he thinks of himself. He wants to see himself. And this is very symbolic of Americans, all Americans that they reach this point, if they ever do, and most don't, of like, oh, I'm a worker. I'd rather be a boss. Duh. That's like kind of what most people's default assumption is. And the way most people cope with them being a worker is to say, I'll be the boss soon enough. I'll be the boss eventually, whether they will or not, because only a few will. But his meeting Alana, Gary's meeting Alana, quickly puts him on the path to reject this being an actor, as being a laborer once and for all in favor. It's like kind of what ultimately motivates him to make that leap that others can't make, that he can make. And we can talk about the means in which he's able to make it, but the real point is what's motivating him and what the film wants you to see as motivating him is the sex drive, is this desire for Alana. That's what gets him going in the morning. That's what makes him go, okay, I'm starting a business. So for most of the film, anything past the introduction of the Soggy Bottom Waterbed Company, Gary is using dominance. He's the dominant because he's a member of the entrepreneurial class now. And he becomes its avatar and its abstract concept in human form. Remember, you always talk about that with Lynch. It's like, it's an abstract concept in human form. That's what Gary is. Gary himself is not only a person, he's this entire concept of what it means to be an entrepreneur in and of itself as an idea. And the idea filtered through the idea that what it means to be an entrepreneur is it means you're a horny boy. Okay. So meanwhile, because Alana's the other side of the story, Alana begins her journey firmly as a depressed libido, as in she's a member of the labor class. She's like working as a photo booth. She's just going through her day, doesn't have any further motivations at that point. That's like one of her tensions with her family, right? So as she gets closer to Gary, she like post a failure in the depressed existence, a way of like she tries to date Lance, like to answer your point about that, because at that point in the story, again, relatively early on, she's still managing her libido through the filter of depression, which is the filter that you have when you're a laborer, meaning like you're kind of like, it doesn't really matter. Sex is just a thing that exists and I need it, but it sucks and I don't have any future. So it doesn't matter who I date or who I screw or whatever. If they can maybe make my life a little bit better, that's the most reasonable expectation. Because I think earlier implying it's like a social climb thing. And it's like, it's easier to see it that way later. But if you go back to that part of the movie, I don't think that's really what it is. Like, it's more of like this, you could say it's a little bit tied to that optimism I was talking about, where it's like this false optimism, where it's like, if you're in that labor position, you kind of are like, oh, one day I'll be a boss, or one day I'll have money, or one day I'll be powerful. And one of the means you could do that is through marrying up. But it's like, it's kind of like that's in and of itself is a fucking lie. It's like, because really what you want is just someone to like make you forget that your life sucks, not actually improve it.
Well, I don't think she's after the cloud in that sense. I just think this character is desperate for attention. And if she's with an actor, she can lean and say, I'm his chaperone. I'm his chaperone. I'm his chaperone. Or she can say, I'm his Grace Kelly for tonight. I'm his Grace Kelly for tonight.
But see, when you say that, what I think of is how those are fantasies. And what I'm saying to the whole point I'm making, that those are the fleeting fantasies of someone who needs the fantasies.
Exactly.
Because
no, she
their
does.
real life is
she is desperate
directionless and
for
bottomless.
something. She's desperate for anything.
Right.
And that's pretty evident. And she wants to be special. She wants to have attention and she wants excitement in her life. She's bored, but she doesn't know how to how to make a direction for herself. So whatever's around her that's shiny, she clings to.
Right. So how she actually starts to get out of this and where her character arc and development actually begins is after she meets Gary, but then she goes out with Lance and that doesn't work out. She comes back to Gary, and the Gary she comes back to, that's the whole point of that entrance scene of like, they're going through this little convention thing. It's ironic that Gary immediately gets arrested, but hey, it actually made him look good, right? It's like this whole thing is Gary is now a businessman. He's an entrepreneur. He's dominant. He has dominant sexual energy, dominant hierarchical power. And now her attraction to him in her entire position is about trying to essentially compete with him in that level. And so that's where the actual heart of the Screwball in the context of this movie starts to emerge, is you are now in that battle of the sexes where you have two dominants. Gary's a dominant and Alana's a dominant, or like a would-be dominance, right? And they're trying to out-dom one another Right? So eventually, though, it like at the midpoint of the film, essentially, because this is the thing, Alana, what you're ultimately tracking with Alana and her journey is like her trying to find what she's actually suited for. So the depressing labor existence that she had before doesn't suit her. Pretending to be an equal to Gary, trying to outdom him on this dominating, business-minded, money-making, status collecting world does not work for her either. Gary kind of basically wins very quickly. And as a result, she retreats. And what she retreats into is going kind of back into this depression-moded labor context, though she's now doing it as an actress. And that's where the Jack Holden stuff comes in, right? But that doesn't last very long either, right? Gary quickly pulls her back in by still exerting this dominance that's attractive to her because she wants that for herself. But it's that, again, because we've already proven it's unstable once, it continues to prove itself unstable to her. It's like it lasts only as long enough for Alana to realize that the fundamental unsustainability and immaturity of this expression. That's the other point about why I think in order to make this stuff really land, it's crucial that Gary actually is a 15-year-old boy, because there's something inherently like that. This must have been struck Paul Thomas Anderson when he first learned about Gary Utzman's whole thing about being a businessman at 15. It's like, how funny is that? Like, we think of businessmen and entrepreneurs and owners as these like old stodgy men, which, you know, by and large they are. But by having a kid replicate that activity, you're kind of like forced back to kind of realize there's something kind of like big man playing big man about it. It's like little kid puffing out. It's just being like, I'm boss, I'm rule, I own. And then you realize all dominance is just that. It's all chest puff. It's all bullshit. It's all a bunch of like horny little boys pretending to be powerful, pretending to have control over everything. And Lana starts to see through that. She starts to see that, and she starts to challenge Gary on that. And that's when she starts to get the upper hand, because she starts to realize this is bullshit. This is immature. I'm talking about a 15-year-old. He doesn't know anything. Why did I ever think he knew anything about anything? He's an idiot. And he's an idiot getting away with it, which again is also a commentary and critique on how these systems work. But he's nevertheless, she starts to see through it. So like a lot of people, because again, if you trace this out to the real life and what these symbols mean, right? What is the path for those who see through it? The path of those who see through it is they seek the alternate way, a third way, ironically, something that will give her an edge in this battle. And it's at least what it tries to claim for itself, despite how ineffective it ultimately is. And that thing I'm talking about is the political class, and the political class expression is suppression, right? And what I mean by, repression is the word I'm using. What I mean by repression is it's this idea of like, or this would be articulated more, and especially when you talk about all the scenes that tie into this in the last like sort of act of the film, right? It's like you have to suppress who you are. You have to suppress your sexuality. You have to control it and limit it and totally basically put it under wraps. Instead of like using it to dominate other people, you basically pretend you don't have it. And that way, the people that are trying to dominate you, you can be like, I don't need you. And the best scene to articulate all of this was the scene where I remember the first time I watched it, I like leaned really hard into my chair because it all started to click together. Is there's the scene where they're like, Gary is right after the senator comes into the film, or so the congressman Wax, councilman Wax, he comes in the film, and Gary starts filming these commercials. Again, he's still turning it into a business. He's like, I'm going to make money by filming these things. Alana, he's like sitting there, he's like firing up cigarettes. She's like, what the fuck are you doing smoking? And he thinks he's so cool because he's like, yeah, I just figured out my next new business, pinball machines, whatever. And she's like, whatever, Gary, who cares about that stuff? I'm doing something that matters, right? So you get her kind of insight. In her mind, she's like not only rejecting Gary, but she's like, I'm proving to you that I win not by playing your game, but by basically saying your game is stupid. And you don't need that stuff. And what actually matters in the world is trying to change the world, which is what I'm doing. Hence what I'm saying about it, this being the political class. But that comes with a cost, because in order to do that, in order to have this, like, I don't need you, which is tantamount to saying I don't need sex, that implies you are repressing your sexuality. That's how you're controlling it. That's how you're limiting it. That's how you're dealing with it, is you're suppressing it. And as we're going to get to in a second, Wax himself is the entire embodiment or the abstract concept in human form for this, right? So Alana, when she's going through this, she realizes that there's a fundamental failure, right? Which is what I was just saying, right? Because Joel Wax is revealed to be what? A closeted gay man. She finds out that she has that's why the movie kind of starts to wrap up there. It's because now she's gone through all three of these stages and found out that none of them work for her. She tried to be
what she thought to be correct was incorrect about all of them.
Right. Which is kind of like, I would say, the overall arc of growth in life is you're supposed to learn what works and what doesn't work. But it's notable that where she ends up is like, okay, I said there's only three options. And I just also said all three options don't work for her. So what does that leave her with? What is this really all about? Like, you know what I mean? If politics don't work, you don't belong in any of these three classes, that means you are a woman without a class, right? Or a classless society of one or something. So before I get to the ultimate point there, what happens next, we have to go back to Gary, because Gary's journey, while parallel to hers, is different. Because Alana goes through all three phases. As I said earlier, Gary really actually mainly just goes through one. He starts in one and starts the other, and that's kind of like where his story really picks up, and then that's where he is the rest of the movie. But he ultimately ends up at a similar point. So how does he get there? So Gary's journey leads him to this crossroads and realization that the dominance that he's been chasing and exerting is hollow. It never satisfies. And you get this in the whole pinball scene. That's what's going on there. It's like, he's opened up this business. He expects, because he had it once kind of with the soggy bottom, like what happened after he opened that thing. It's like, all the girls want to fuck me. I'm going to I don't even need Alana, because look at that. I got again, it's weird because we're talking about a 15-year-old dating an older girl, but it's kind of like the cliche actually in Gary's mind. Cause like I said, Gary might be a 15-year-old, but he really just represents the 15-year-oldness of all businessmen, of all business. He's like, I don't need Alana. I can get hotter and younger, to quote Glenn Guglia from The Wedding Singer. That's his thing.
Glenn Guglia.
You remember that? I actually rewatched that movie the other day. That was just actually a great movie. Not quite Screwball. I wish I could say it was, but it's very much the traditional rom-com, but very good one. And yeah, he's like, I can get hotter and younger. That's Gary's mindset there, which is, like it was with the character Glenn, a cliche of what it means to be I'm some rich yuppie guy. I have business. I have money. I can do whatever I want. No one can stop me. That's dominance. He's like, I can get hotter and younger. Hotter and younger girls are going to come up to me all the time. I don't need
Damn, I got bitches. Damn, I got bitches.
Damn, I got bitches. Yeah, there you go. Kendrick Lamar. So, yeah. So that's where Gary's mindset. And it kind of works out from there. Obviously, he eventually realizes that there's something about Alana that's more meaningful to him than that. And he can't quite realize it directly, which is why he immediately reverts back to the behaviors. It doesn't change. So that's what I'm saying. Alana goes through a journey of change and growth. Gary is more of this flatline character. He has an initial sort of pivot in growth, but it's really just him giving into this base desire, because as you see in the confidence he projects in the opening scene, he was basically faking it till he made it. He was pretending to be this guy before he even was this guy. And one could argue he's always pretending to be this guy, because the only thing there is to this guy, and the only thing there ever is to business and entrepreneurship, is bullshit artistry. Every businessman is a con man in some way. So it's like, it's always talk and no walk. It's always bullshit. It's always exerting dominance, puffing out your chest before you actually have anything. All the power you have is really an illusion. You're really just a fucking horny 15-year-old boy, and that's what you are, right? So Gary is forced to realize that this is hollow, because he opens the pinball thing, Alana's not there because Alana's moved on to become part of the political class. And so she's now like, I'm opposed to capitalism or whatever. She's like, you know what I mean? She has no interest in this anymore. So it doesn't work on that level. Alana won't come or in his mind. So that's sad. And then what has he seen all around him? It's a bunch of little kids younger than him running around.
Making a mess, abusing his pinball machines.
And this is
people are just beating up his pinball machines. He's like, no one cares but me.
No one cares. But it's such a perfect metaphor for where this all ends up and why the whole thing is so hollow. It's like you're not. There's more little hungrier, little nastier little kids all around you, always coming up behind you. And by the time you realize, what the fuck did I do with my life? Why was I suppressing and trying to control the one thing that actually made me feel anything, the most human part about me, in pursuit of this, thinking it would get me that somehow? Because society has told me what gets you the thing is the thing, but they're not telling you to get you the thing you want. They're telling you to get you the thing they need from you. Society needs people to start businesses. Society needs people to revolve their existence around money and transaction and market and all that stuff. So they don't care that all you really want is just someone to say, I love you and hang out with you all day. So they tell you need those things to get that thing. And so Gary realizes very quickly, and if he stays here, if he stays in the pinball palace, he will just be devoured by the nasty little kids who will replace him. And so he's like, fuck, I don't want to be here. And with a little help from two other HAIM sisters who, yeah, they're Alana sisters, but they almost like represent like godly, like angelic beings of some sort of wisdom. Like the way they kind of subtly stir things in the direction it needs to go, right? Which I think is, again, very fitting for how PTA probably sees.
Isn't that more like the Fates from Shakespeare then?
Yeah, exactly. However you want to depict it. Yeah, I was actually thinking, to quote a movie that I apparently don't like, you do, like the angels of It's a Wonderful Life, you know? Something like that. So they're like, so this is where we get into our actual conclusion, which I went from thinking, I don't know what this is. This just feels like a rote genre defaulting. But no, it's the entire point, as I kind of started with, but now you see how it all kind of comes together. So Gary, now that he realizes that there's nothing for him, he finally remembers where his libido actually was trying to guide him, that he was actually, instead of listening to it, just trying to control it and divert it or suppress it. Well, in this case, dominate it. It goes towards Alana. And no amount of enterprising will ever fully dominate her, because dominating her is not the point. Dominance should have nothing to do with it. It's a losing game. So Gary realizes he must reject his class, which in turn means all three classes, because he never had anything to do with the other two anyway. And instead, run from society, because society is just those three classes. Once you're not in one of those two classes, you're no longer part of society. You are existing in opposition or outside of its boundaries. So he's now accepted, I'm outside the boundaries. The only thing left to do is to run away from this. And running away from society is the same direction as running towards where he actually wanted to be going in the whole time, which is Alana, and vice versa. Alana realizes that this entire thing that she's been building up over the last few weeks about wax is a lie, that there's nothing there for her internally. It's all more just, again, this repressive environment where you can't be yourself. You can't be anybody. You have to be this thing to exert your moral character to the world about I'm against all this money grubbing lies and whatever. So she's like, that's not the path for her. So she has rejected all three forms of society and runs away. But that means running towards Gary. So boom, these motherfuckers collide again. They've been colliding the whole time, but they've just been lying to themselves about it. So they collide again. And, this is going to sound blunt, but this is what I'm saying. This is the point. This is what I mean about calling it screw it. It's like, he's 15, she's 25 or 28, according to you. It's like, it's illegal, but fuck society. So meaning fuck its laws, fuck its rules. I don't care. I reject it wholly. So the rules can't stop us. Our urges are our urges. We're going to go for it. And, Like that's where it ends. And like, that's the whole point. It's like, it's kind of like, instead of it being like going from a divorce to a marriage, it's like, it's a marriage that requires a divorce, like a divorce from the society, like, you know. And so Gary, like when Gary, because that way it actually ends, you'll note this, he calls her Mrs. Alana Valentine, which is ostensibly saying, this is my wife, right?
Right.
So again, it's
and she
PTA,
slaps you immediately and is like, Gary, doesn't she?
Because like, I think that's part of the point too, is like, okay, we're getting married in the symbolic sense, but marriage is also another institution of the society I just told you we're rejecting. So shut up, fuck up with that. Okay. So yeah, it's kind of fitting. So you can look at the whole thing, like I'm saying, you know, to take the metaphor back towards the reality, which is why I think what the movie's saying is important beyond just characters. It's like, this is a way of looking at the limits of society for all of us collectively, not just those of us who are trying to, you know, groom 15-year-old, which is, like I said, without question, a bad thing. But it's this idea of, okay, we either function through depression, through dominance, or repression, right? So it's like this, to articulate this depression idea, just one final clear time. It's like, in depression, or when you're a working person, your urges, your libido, it's an inconvenience. It's like, it's one that you can either be controlled or use. It's simply a way to replace the sense of accomplishment that is otherwise unattainable for you. And you can't get promoted. You're barely eking by. Maybe you get laid every other night on the weekends or something, but that's your existence. You're not even sure it can go anywhere because you're not sure what you can afford or can't afford. None of it's easy. And it's just this cycle of disappointment, and it's depressing. That's why it's called depression. So depression, and I think this is true of, you know, people who actually suffer from depression, it can both completely cut your sex drive, or it can go, okay, like people who are depressive or manic depressive, they sometimes are out having sex with everybody, or they're not having sex with anybody. It's like one or the other, a little bit of both in some cases. That's just kind of how it works, right? And this is how you eke by within the bounds of order, you know, if you're there. Or you could try dominance, which requires you to kind of take on this entrepreneurial mantle of like, I'm out here to make money. I'm starting businesses. I'm doing this. And it's like, it's basically this, you know, we talk about sometimes this capital realism idea, but it's like, you'll never beat them, so you better join them. It's like, you're only as good as like you're able to kind of actually compete. And it's all about competition kicks in. So there's only antagonism. There's only dominance. You just keep fucking going at it. And you're never gonna be fully nourished. So it's just like, it's again like a road to nowhere. At the end, you get to life, you die a bitter old Ebenezer Scrooge, and that's where it's going. And then the last breath, the repression, like I said, the politics. If you can't stand to join it, control it, you ought to outright just oppose it, which is like just sticking out and being like, I have this like moral opposition to society. I don't like how it's ruled. I don't like the corruption. I don't like the money. I'm against it. But what are you really doing? You're just kind of, you know, I mean, kind of having a very difficult existence. You know, I'd say, you know, if I were to put myself in this paradigm, I might end up here, but like, it's not always great. And I mean, especially in this regard, because ultimately you're still within the bounds of society. You're like, and the bound you're in, as you see with Wax, as you see with Alana, is one that forces you to kind of be a professional liar, to be someone who can't be themselves, someone who needs to like talk for other people instead of their emotions, someone who isn't allowed to have a private life, let alone a public private life. Like, or the privacy becomes like this whole other degree of conflict and just like horrible repression. That's what it is. So these three forces are always there. People kind of either stay in one, they move out of one, they move into one. But what Licorice Pizza and Paul Thomas Anderson, I think, are saying is like, dude, ease up. You feel the way you feel because you were born into the society, but this society is not part of you. You are basically told you have to be a part of it. That's what everyone else does. They conform into it in one way or the other. But you're never going to feel at home there. None of us do, because it's not what we're actually meant for. It's not actually what we want. We're told we want it, but we don't. What we want is what we want. And again, this is not me trying to make a play at the infamous, horrible Woody Allen, the heart wants what the heart wants bullshit. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm trusting people not to take what I'm saying so literally or divisively. I'm trusting people to kind of be able to understand this in the deeper metaphorical way I mean. But, look, it's like, it's saying you need to be free to be who you are. And we know historically there's a lot of good versions of this, obviously. Like, I, for one, am very happy we live in a world now where people can identify how they want to identify and be with who they want to be with. It was a hard one battle to get here, and it's still being fought. So I'm not saying that we should take that battlefield to other areas that I would agree should be outside the bounds. And when I talk about earlier societies, like pre-civilization societies or societies that exist outside of the traditional sort of civilized structure we have, they have their own oppositions to some of the things that I would say should still be oppositional. No society, no tribe, no group of people exists without any boundaries. And I'm not saying this movie is like some crazy anarchist libertarian idea of you should just be able to do whatever you want in a totally lawless, totally conventionalist society. Because while this movie does focus on two individuals, I think it should be said, or can be said, to have the good sense enough to put it in the context of society to say no, we do need rules. We do need boundaries. It's about what's the reason for these boundaries and what they actually are, and how can we have the most freedom for people possible that still keeps the basic premise of a cohesive society where people aren't outright hurting other people and people can depend on each other, because we actually do need to do that. And if you look to a lot of our tribal ancestors, I do feel like they more or less, not without their flaws or difficulties or things that we wouldn't want to necessarily go back to, had the picture a lot clearer than our modern society, which I consider to be, I live in it, I exist in it, but by its very nature, an unsatisfying. And I think Licorice Pizza kind of offers a spark to say, you can escape from it. You don't have to be a slave to it. Like, you can get out of it, and it's beautiful if you do. And that's why I conclude the movie being like, good for them. I don't feel this controversy doesn't change what there might be to have that conversation. And I'm all for people having that conversation if that's the conversation they want to have. I just think that it's unfortunate if it comes at the expense of people recognizing kind of what I feel is like the more fundamental message of just like, you gotta just, pursue love no matter what else anyone tells you. Right. But yeah, that's basically how I have it concluded. Any other thoughts on any of that, Dana, before we get off of here?
I think we covered all the bases.
Well, yeah. Okay, let me ask you this. One last question, because I said, okay, what is any of what I'm going to say going to change your mind about the movie? Or at the very least, make you consider that whatever you might find, quote, annoying about Alana, it's like her character is living an annoying existence.
I know. I get,
even talk about the HAIM family.
I understand why she's annoying. I just still find her character annoying.
But you don't. I guess what I'm saying, you don't sympathize with it. You don't sympathize with it.
I mean, like there are moments when I sympathize with her, but then she's annoying again, and I forget about it.
I mean, look, here's the thing. I do.
Every choice that she would make, I would make the opposite one. I would be dating the hot guy from the political party who asked me out, who's waiting for me.
Yeah, but then you would never find out that Joel Wax is a repressed gay man, and there'd be no point.
Oh, that's true. No, she was supposed to go meet Mr. Wax and then come back. She was going to go meet. She was like, I'll be gone really quick. I'm just going to go take his wallet.
So you're saying she should have went with that guy instead of running back to Gary?
Absolutely. That's how I think the movie should have ended.
Then she would just be running back right to the same conformity that I'm saying the whole point is to get rid of. But that's okay. Dana, what I'm really saying about the sympathy for her is that I think all the things that I can't say specifically. I mean, I've listened to some of the things you've said, but maybe I'm not seeing them as maybe I'm not totally understanding what particular annoys them about you necessarily. But if I go with the premise that they're annoying, to me, that's only a reflection of the fact that our existences are annoying when viewed on the outside.
Oh, right. No,
Most people are a bunch of indecisive people running around with no clue, chasing at potential answers to their solutions and often finding them to be not the solution to their problem. And that's what I'm saying is the point of the story, is like depicting that. And again, I'm not saying that this should automatically excuse what you find to be unlikable, but I don't know. I feel like maybe if you watch the movie again, having had this conversation, maybe you'll find it less annoying. I don't know. Just a food for thought.
That's fair.
All right, Data.
Till next week.
Get some women, take them to the Peachtree Dams. I say get liquored up and take them to the Peachtree Dams.
Do you know what I mean? You know why? It's a scary thing to give to a guy like me. Do you know what I mean?
I say get liquored up and take them to the Peachtree Dams.
Do you know what I mean?
I say get liquored up and take them to the Peachtree Dams. Get liquored up and take him to the Peachtree Dams.
Do you know what I mean? You know why? Final cut. It's a scary thing to give to a guy like me.